Chapter 287. It was a sudden ray of light that rose from the fire god's staff. The entire sand dune seemed to be shrouded in this ray of light in an instant. It was majestic and turbulent, and the light was like fire, roaring loudly. Almost at the same time, all the barbarian warriors who were immersed in the bloody slaughter and life and death situation on the battlefield did not notice the abnormality on the sand dune next to the battlefield. The only one who felt it was the priest who was casting the spell with the staff in his hand. The earthy yellow staff that was at its peak state and invincible on the battlefield suddenly trembled violently. A few rays of light immediately shot back and returned to the staff, flickering non-stop, as if it was vigilant. The stone puppet in front of it seemed to have lost a part of its strength, and its speed and agility also slowed down. But even so, this terrifying and powerful stone puppet was still a terrifying existence that could not be defeated on the battlefield. The situation of the battle still did not change, and even the two sides did not feel anything wrong. At most, they thought that the priest felt that this little bit of power was enough to win, and there was no need to waste any more energy. However, at this moment, the priest's face suddenly became solemn. Just at that moment, he clearly felt a powerful, origin power, suddenly appear around him. This kind of pure and powerful spiritual power was something he had only seen from the few shamans in the war god temple in the past. Could it be that a powerful shaman had suddenly come here? The moment this thought surfaced in his mind, the priest's face instantly turned pale. Like the surrounding barbarian warriors who worshipped him, he was even more in awe of the few shamans who were at the peak of the barbarian race's power. He did not even dare to think of making an enemy out of them. However, very soon, the priest noticed that something was wrong. Because other than the wave of spiritual power, he did not feel the monstrous aura that seemed to be able to cover the sky and cover the sun that he was so familiar with. This discovery made the priest feel slightly relieved, and his eyes immediately swept around. After a moment, his eyes fell on the sand dune at the side of the battlefield. There seemed to be a ball of fire burning there, and the fire seemed to be enveloping the entire hill. And the wave of spiritual power that he felt before was coming from there. After seeing the fire, the priest could not help but be startled. Fire's spiritual power. Didn't this power disappear from the wilderness for thousands of years? A moment later, the priest sneered and a look of understanding appeared in his eyes. Only the shamans of the barbarian tribe could master the true 5 elemental spiritual powers of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. Priests like him could only cultivate various kinds of secondary spiritual powers, but their power was equally powerful. Thinking of this, he felt a little disgusted with the enemy hiding on the sand dune. This was to disrupt his plan to subdue the mountain spirit race. Even if the other side hadn't made a move yet, as long as they affected this area, they would become his enemy. Since it wasn't Lord Shaman, then there was nothing to be afraid of. This priest himself was an extremely talented rising star in the war god temple. If it wasn't for the fact that his background wasn't too good and he didn't have the backing of a powerful tribe, his achievements would have been much greater than what he was now. It was precisely because of this that he was even more eager to subdue a tribe for his own use. But in the barbarian wasteland, all the tribes insisted on a single belief in the power of the totem. Apart from worshipping their ancestors, the barbarian tribes only worshipped one kind of totem. For example, a tribe that worshipped a fire totem would never believe in the power of a water totem. The totem spiritual power of this priest belonged to the earth totem system of the 5 elements. He wanted to find a tribe that worshipped an earth power. Moreover, this tribe had already lost its priest, so the tribe couldn't be too weak. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to provide him with all kinds of strong support, and it would be useless to subdue it. Therefore, subduing the mountain spirit race was something he couldn't afford to fail. Originally, he had basically controlled the morale of the mountain spirit race. In today's battle against 4 small tribes, as long as he won the battle, the mountain spirit race would be completely loyal to him. Just as he was about to succeed, an accident had occurred. This time, he couldn't back down no matter what. The priest picked up his magic staff and started to chant a mysterious incantation. His body turned half a circle, no longer facing the front of the battlefield. Instead, He looked in the direction of the sand dune. The leaders of the mountain spirit race next to the priest soon noticed that something was wrong. They raised their heads and looked at the strange fire on the sand dune. Suddenly, their faces changed. However, seeing that the priest was calm and composed, and that he was directly attacking the sand dune, they felt relieved. In this battle, the high priest had already proven his strength. A yellow light rose up like a vast and boundless wasteland. It turned into a huge fist in midair, and then smashed down on the sand dune. Lu Chen, who was hiding behind the sand dune, had a helpless expression on his face. According to his original intention, he did not care whether the two barbarians fought to the death. It had nothing to do with him. Just as he was about to leave, who would have thought that the fire god's staff would do something like this? Although Lu Chen didn't know why the barbarian priest was so decisive and didn't even hesitate to attack them, it was obvious that the priest regarded them as an enemy. The fire god's staff emitted raging flames, and the body of the staff became hotter and hotter. It seemed to be very angry. Perhaps the priest thought that the other side was bold and dared to provoke him. But even if he did provoke him, there was nothing he could do. Lu Chen was helpless against the fire god's staff that could only be used as a torch for illumination. Seeing that the other party's powerful fist was about to smash down, in a moment of desperation, he could only channel the power of the black fire in his body into the fire god's staff. The black fire flashed in his eyes. Almost at the same time, the fire god's staff shone with a strange light. All the totem runes appeared at the same time, and a pure and powerful spiritual power gushed out. It was fire. Black fire. Lu Chen was so shocked that he couldn't speak for a moment. He had tried countless times in the ancient tree hole, but he couldn't activate the fire god's staff. He didn't expect that there would be a change when he used it today. As the black flames on the Vulcan staff rose up, it immediately devoured all the original flames, turning them into dark flames. The entire sand dune seemed to darken in the blink of an eye. Then, a huge shadow appeared in midair, whistling as it flew. The giant fist of the barbarian priest smashed fiercely into the black shadow. But, it was immediately entangled by the black flames. Then, a terrifying scene occurred. The black flames started to corrode the giant fist from all directions. Then, the giant fist started to emit a low-pitched sound that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves. In the blink of an eye, the entire giant fist was corroded. The last bit of light tried to escape. But, it was engulfed by the sea of black shadows. It didn't even make a sound before it disappeared. In the distance, the barbarian priest's face suddenly turned pale. He spat out a mouthful of blood. His expression changed greatly, and his eyes were filled with disbelief and fear. At that moment, he seemed to have seen a ghost. He lost his composure and shouted, devil fire, this is the power of the black fire." His voice suddenly became hoarse. A moment later, a flame suddenly emerged from his throat. It burned crazily, and danced wildly in the black shadow. It burnt and melted his flesh. The priest screamed at the sky. He even threw away the staff in his hand. He covered his throat with both hands and fell to the ground. He started to struggle and twitch. The barbarians of the mountain spirit tribe were shocked. They were all dumbfounded. They didn't know what had happened. One of the more courageous barbarian leaders, out of respect for the priest, took the risk to help and extinguish the flames on the priest's body. But in an instant, the black flames spread from the priest's body to his own body. Ah! A shrill scream came from the mouth of the strong barbarian warrior. He was not afraid of bloodshed, but at this moment, he seemed to be suffering from an unimaginable pain. He fell to the ground, twisting and struggling with all his strength. The surrounding barbarians screamed again and again. They instantly retreated to the side, forming a large circle. They could only watch as the two people in the middle were burned to death by the strange and terrible black fire. In the end, only 2 charred skeletons were left. When the priest died in pain and madness, the stone puppet on the distant battlefield suddenly stopped moving. A moment later, this incomparably powerful killing machine seemed to have lost the support of its skeleton. All the stones and sand shattered, disintegrating into a large pile of scattered rubble, and collapsed with a loud bang. On the battlefield, there was a sudden silence. The barbarian warriors on both sides didn't seem to know what had happened. They looked at each other with their mouths agape. But then, a mournful scream came from the back of the mountain spirit tribe's camp. It resounded through the battlefield, and the situation suddenly changed. Countless mountain spirit tribe warriors looked back. They didn't know who shouted, "The priest is dead," but the crowd immediately fell into chaos. On the other hand, the morale of the allied soldiers of the few tribes was greatly boosted. A few of the leaders even seized the opportunity to roar out commands. A few of the warrior leaders even took the lead and charged into the battlefield, instantly setting off a furious counterattack. The mountain spirit tribe's side seemed to have fallen from the highest point. The whole formation trembled because of the priest's death. Then, it began to collapse. The result of relying too much on a powerful force was that when that force disappeared, they would be weaker and smaller than ordinary people. The tide of battle turned in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the front line of the mountain spirit tribe's warriors had fallen. Blood splattered everywhere. Everyone turned around and fled. Behind the crowd, someone from the allied tribes suddenly roared. "Fire God, fire God, the fire God has been reborn." Chapter 288. There was no turning back in that battle. The mountain spirit tribe's morale were completely shattered by the sudden death of the shaman. They were chased and slaughtered by the joint army of several tribes. Blood flowed all the way, and at least half of the mountain spirit tribe's warriors were killed, and they fled in panic. The mountain spirit tribe couldn't be ranked at the top among the barbarian tribes of the southern wilderness. Their overall strength was probably a little lower than the middle level. But after such a big battle, they had lost more than half of their elite warriors. It was a big blow to the mountain spirit tribe's strength. If they didn't have any more opportunities or powerful talents, they would inevitably fall into the ranks of the weak tribes. Different from the gloomy outlook of the defeated, the victors were full of excitement and joy. The armies of the few tribes chased after the mountain spirits for a long distance. The mountain spirits paid the price of more blood and human lives. After dying a bloody path, the armies of the few tribes returned triumphantly. Lu Chen, who was standing on the sand dune, wanted to leave before the fire god's staff quietened down. However, he soon discovered that he had been surrounded by the barbarian leaders and a portion of their subordinates. Lu Chen sighed and looked into the distance. He saw that the warriors in the distance were cleaning up the battlefield. There seemed to be two important things. The first was to check whether the fallen warriors were still alive. If they were comrades, they would help them back for treatment. If they were enemies of the mountain spirit tribe, they would smash their heads and stomp on their chests, so that they would die a more thorough death. For a time, the battlefield was once again filled with blood-curdling screams, accompanied by the maniacal laughter of the victorious barbarian warriors, turning the battlefield into a bloody scene. Other than that, they were probably looting. The so-called belongings were actually the belongings of the dead, such as weapons, accessories, and even clothes. Many warriors of the mountain spirit tribe were stripped naked after they died, and fell to the ground in shame and dignity. What was even more surprising was that the barbarian warriors of the other tribes, who had fought together in the bloody battle, were not only looting the dead warriors of the mountain spirit tribe, but also looting the dead warriors of the other tribes, as if they had gone mad from poverty. But in this way, disputes immediately arose. Everyone wanted to rob others, but their dead brothers absolutely could not be humiliated like this. So, there was an immediate uproar on the battlefield. For a moment, many people pulled out their weapons, and the atmosphere became somewhat tense. This had alarmed the few barbarian leaders who had come to the sand dune. Fortunately, these barbarian leaders still had some brains. They turned around and ran back, kicking, cursing, and yelling. Finally, they managed to restrain their subordinates. They separated most of the barbarian warriors and slowly returned to their own camps. However, they naturally wouldn't return the things that they had snatched from the barbarian leaders. In this way, the battlefield finally quieted down, leaving only a miserable and ugly scene. Most of the barbarians seemed to be used to this kind of situation. Although they were fighting fiercely just now, they seemed to have forgotten about this matter after a while. They were happily counting their spoils of war. Those who had a lot of spoils of war were laughing loudly, while those who had a little bit of spoils of war were dejected. Compared to these useless barbarian warriors, the barbarian chiefs ran back to the sand dune. It was only now that the Vulcan staff in Lu Chen's hand had completely calmed down. It no longer glowed or heated up, and the totem patterns had completely disappeared. It looked just like a smooth staff. How did a human feel when he was surrounded by a large group of barbarians in the southern border? Lu Chen felt that he had roughly understood. He looked at the barbarians who were slowly encircling him from both sides of the sand dune. He frowned slightly, and looked left and right from time to time, thinking about how to escape. And beside him, Atsu also seemed to feel the danger. His eyes revealed an ominous glint, and he bared his fangs. A low growl came from his throat, and he stared at the enemies who were encircling him from afar. After seeing the appearance of Lu Chen, who was standing at the highest point of the sand dune, all the barbarians subconsciously stopped in their tracks. Everyone's face revealed a look of astonishment, as if they had seen something unimaginable. After a moment, someone suddenly shouted, "Human race?" After this shout, the crowd of barbarians instantly burst into an uproar. Suddenly, there was a series of ping ping pang pang sounds. It was unknown how many people instantly pulled out their weapons. They roared angrily, and it seemed that they were about to rush over and hack Lu Chen to death. Lu Chen's pupils shrank slightly. He took a step back and placed a hand on Atu's back. Just as he was about to move, the fire god's staff in his hand, which had already calmed down, suddenly flashed. A beam of flame swayed. It did not have a strong aura, but it was very obvious that it swayed towards a certain direction in the crowd of barbarians. All the barbarians suddenly froze for a moment. Their faces revealed a look of astonishment and instinctive reverence, but it seemed that the hatred in their hearts was even greater. Moreover, they did not quite believe that a human could possess such a legendary power. Therefore, they still shouted loudly, and were about to rush over and tear Lu Chen into thousands of pieces. But at this moment, suddenly, a tribe leader in the crowd of barbarians roared fiercely. He took a few steps and rushed to the front, and suddenly ran in front of Lu Chen. Lu Chen's face was stern, and a black flame flashed in his eyes. When he was about to attack, he suddenly saw that the abnormally burly barbarian leader stared at him. Especially when he saw the black flame that flashed in Lu Chen's eyes, his entire face suddenly revealed an indescribable excitement. Roar! He suddenly roared, and turned around. He held a giant axe in his hand horizontally in front of him, and like a raging beast, he stood in front of Lu Chen. Stop! This roar was like a clap of thunder, instantly resounding through the entire hill. All the barbarians were stunned, and stopped in their tracks to look at the barbarian leader. Immediately, the barbarian leader waved his giant axe and roared, "Black Fire Warriors, come here." With this order, a group of barbarian warriors that looked incomparably valiant immediately responded. From the clothes and accessories on their bodies, these barbarian warriors were all from the same tribe. With a clatter, they all stood behind the barbarian leader. Facing more barbarian warriors around them, these barbarians of the Black Fire tribe did not have the slightest hesitation. They directly pulled out their weapons behind the leader, and looked fiercely at their surroundings. There was no doubt that as long as the leader of the Black Fire tribe gave the order, these warriors of the Black Fire tribe would not hesitate to fight to the death with this group of people who were their comrades not long ago. "Hui Yan, what are you doing?" A shout came from the crowd, and a moment later, 3 people walked out. They all looked like the barbarian leaders. It was also at this time that the remaining barbarian warriors seemed to have a subtle atmosphere. They all retreated and gathered behind their leader, and then looked at the people of the other tribes around them with vigilance. Among the 3 barbarian leaders on the left, middle, and right, the one who shouted was the one on the left. Then, the eldest barbarian leader standing in the middle also shouted, Hui Yan, we, the Black Fire, Thunder Lizard, Divine Wood, and Ghost Eye tribes, have joined hands to fight, and we are like brothers. Why are you suddenly pointing your blade at us? What do you mean? The barbarian leader called Hui Yan, who stood in front of Lu Chen, had a cold expression. He was not moved by these words at all, and only said, This person has nothing to do with you, I want to take him away. What? The barbarian warriors in the three tribes suddenly became restless. The leader of the Thunder Lizard tribe, who was wearing a terrifying lizard head ornament on his head, scolded, Are you blind? That's not a barbarian, that's a human. Yes, how many years has it been since a human came to the southern border? He must be a spy, we must kill him. Have you forgotten the humiliation our ancestors suffered in the north? How many great heroic souls lost their lives in that land? They were all killed by the human race. For a moment, the emotions of the tribes were stirred up, and curses came one after another. Even the warriors of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be puzzled and doubtful. Although they still stood firmly behind their leader, Hui Yan, from time to time they would sneak glances at this leader who had suddenly become strange. Hui Yan's face was still ferocious and solemn, and it seemed that he had no intention of backing down. He slashed the giant axe in his hand in the air, and with a low roar, he looked around and said, This is the power of the Black Fire, the sign of the resurrection of our fire god. His face was ferocious, and he glared at the three people in front of him. The killing intent in his eyes was not concealed, and he roared, Whoever dares to touch him will have to step over the dead bodies of all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe. As soon as these words came out, the area under the sand dunes suddenly became silent. As for the warriors of the Black Fire tribe behind Hui Yan, they all seemed to have come to a sudden realization. With a whoosh, they immediately surrounded Lu Chen and Black Wolf Tu. The sudden turn of events made Lu Chen a little stunned, and he couldn't come back to his senses for a while. While the warriors of the Black Fire tribe in front of him were prepared to fight to the death, many of them secretly looked back at him, as if they were full of curiosity towards Lu Chen. In front of the crowd, the leaders of the three tribes were also stunned. Soon, everyone remembered the scene that happened at the most intense moment of the battle. The rising flame power had obviously defeated the mountain spirit priest's earth's spiritual power, killed the priest, and destroyed the terrifying stone puppet. This was the key to turning the tide of the battle. For a moment, everyone was silent, and many of the barbarian warriors showed a trace of awe on their faces, and even put down the weapons they had raised. But at this time, the leader of the Ghost Eye tribe, the only one among the three who hadn't spoken, suddenly said with a cold gaze, Hui Yan, are you trying to take a priest back? Chapter 289. Snatch a priest back. Many of the barbarians who heard Hui Yan's words did not understand. Their faces were filled with astonishment and confusion. But soon, the expressions of the two barbarian leaders who stood at the front changed drastically. Their gazes immediately landed on Lu Chen, who was standing behind Hui Yan. In the southern wilderness, for every tribe, the people who mastered the power of witchcraft were the source of the tribe's prosperity. However, there were only a very small number of people who could perceive the incomparably chaotic spiritual power and use a special method to cultivate witchcraft. These people were known as priests. And among the priests, those who stood at the peak and were able to grasp the source of the spiritual energy of the southern territory were called shamans. Any tribe that lost a priest would not be able to maintain its prosperity. This was not only because of the weakening of the tribe's power, but also because the priest was often the wisest person in the tribe. For many years, shamans and priests had always guided the barbarian tribes of the southern wilderness. The barbarians believed in and worshipped witchcraft, and revered shamans and priests. Without the guidance of the priest, the tribe would eventually weaken, and they would fall into a predicament in the vast and harsh wilderness. Without the guidance of the priest's witchcraft and wisdom, the only thing they could rely on was the flesh and courage of the warriors in the tribe. However, these things were extremely fragile in the face of great power. A few years ago, the mountain spirit tribe was like the other four tribes. They didn't have a priest and struggled in the lower world of the wilderness. However, Once they were influenced by a priest, the strength of the mountain spirit tribe rapidly expanded. Today, they could even fight against 4 people alone. The power of worship and belief of the Black Fire tribe had indeed appeared before. After the chief Ghost Eye explained, the other 2 tribal chiefs immediately understood. But understanding was one thing, but they still looked at Lu Chen in disbelief. That was a human. In the long history of the southern wilderness, there had never been a non-barbarian priest or shaman. But, no one had ever said that the priest and shaman couldn't be a foreigner. A human was going to become a priest of the barbarian tribe? The few leaders and the barbarian warriors behind them, who were starting to understand the situation, even the barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe, all had their mouths wide open in shock. Lu Chen had also heard it himself. After understanding the meaning behind this matter, even though his temperament was much calmer than an ordinary person, he could not help but be greatly shocked. His gaze landed on the back of the abnormally tall and sturdy Huyen. Obviously, this chief warrior of the Black Fire tribe had thought of all these in a short period of time. Then, he decided to use all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe to fight against the other 3 tribes without any hesitation. Even Lu Chen himself felt that it was a little inconceivable. At this moment, Huyen, who was being stared at by everyone, had a serious expression on his face. However, his expression was firm and he had no intention of backing down. He only said in a low voice, "Whether he is a priest or not, I don't know. This is up to the Black Fire tribe's chief to decide. But what appeared just now was the power of the fire god of our Black Fire tribe. No matter what, I must bring this person back. Whether he lives or dies will be decided by the chief." The other 3 tribes looked at each other, and the chiefs frowned. At the same time, the barbarian warriors seemed to have unknowingly spread out, gradually surrounding the Black Fire tribe. Huyen's expression became even colder. He stared at the 3 chiefs and shouted, "Do you really want to fight to the death with the Black Fire tribe?" The 3 barbarian chiefs also looked hesitant. They looked at each other, then walked together and began to discuss in low voices. Actually, based on their current strength, none of the tribes had any priests. With 3 tribes against 1, the Black Fire tribe would definitely have the upper hand. But if the Black Fire tribe fought to the death, the 3 tribes would inevitably suffer some additional losses. The life of every barbarian warrior was precious. Although they could fight to the death for the tribe, as a chief, they could not easily waste the lives of the warriors under them. Otherwise, the great ancestors of the tribe would curse them, and they would forever be despised by the tribe, and their souls would never be able to return to peace. While the other 3 tribes were discussing, the atmosphere between the barbarian warriors suddenly became even more tense. Although Huyen's attitude seemed to be abnormally firm, in fact, his forehead and back were faintly covered in cold sweat. He only felt that his heart was abnormally heavy, as if there was a huge stone pressing down on it. Although the warriors of the Black Fire tribe would not question his decision, he himself had to think more. Was it really worth it for such a human? Cough, cough, cough. Just when the atmosphere was a little stiff, Huyen suddenly heard a light cough coming from behind him. The sound sounded a little strange. Huyen was startled for a moment. He turned around and saw that it was Lu Chen looking at him and giving him a look. Huyen was silent for a moment, then quietly took 2 steps back and came to Lu Chen's side. His body was considered tall and burly among the barbarian warriors. At this moment, when Lu Chen stood beside him, he looked like a child who had just grown up. Huyen lowered his voice, his expression slightly strange and complicated. He said in a low voice, "What do you want?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Tell them that as long as they let us go, they will hand over all the treasures that you have plundered." Huyen's expression suddenly changed, and a murderous aura instantly leaked out. He could not help but take a step towards Lu Chen. Some of the warriors of the Black Fire tribe who were closer also suddenly became furious. In an instant, several weapons were pointed at Lu Chen. It seemed that there was no need for the 3 tribes to do anything. Just based on what he said just now, the people of the Black Fire tribe couldn't wait to get rid of this fraud who might have the power of their tribe's fire god. Towards the murderous aura around him, Lu Chen did not seem to feel it. His eyes only stared at Hui Yan. After a moment, he said coldly, "You want the power of the priest, so you don't believe my words?" Hui Yan angrily growled, "These things were exchanged with the lives of my warriors. Why should I hand them over? You value this very much?" "Of course." "Do the 3 tribes value it?" "Of course." "Then you throw all these things to their warriors. If one tribe has more, another tribe has less, and one tribe doesn't give anything at all, what do you think the consequences will be?" Hui Yan was just about to angrily speak, but suddenly, his body fiercely shook. Immediately after, his eyes slowly widened. Looking at Lu Chen, a trace of shock and a complicated expression appeared in his eyes. That look, it was as if he had suddenly seen a ghost. Lu Chen sighed and softly said to Hui Yan, "Do you know what the priest's power is other than witchcraft?" Hui Yan was stunned for a moment, then suddenly turned around. His entire face seemed to be on fire, burning brightly. After letting out a low roar, he shouted to the surrounding warriors, "Hand over all the things that you have just plundered." Chapter 290. Ordering the Black Fire Tribe's barbarian warriors to hand over their loot was like seeing a starving dog and ordering it to spit out the bones it had painstakingly snatched. Most of the barbarian warriors in the surroundings didn't move after hearing the shout of their leader. They all widened their eyes and looked at Hui Yan as if they were looking at a madman. At the same time, some of the Black Fire Tribe's warriors looked at Hui Yan with hostility, but not at Hui Yan, who had gone through life and death with them. Instead, they looked at Lu Chen, the instigator of all this. They clenched their weapons tightly, looking as if they wanted to hack him to death. The barbarians were strong and fierce, and most of the warriors were simple-minded. Therefore, even when facing Hui Yan, they would show a bit of dissatisfaction. But no matter what, Hui Yan was still the chief. Seeing the expressions of the people around him, he also became angry. However, there was no such thing as tactful persuasion among the barbarians, so he directly chose the most common and most direct method. "Go to hell." The tall and fierce barbarian cursed loudly. He kicked a barbarian warrior who was standing closest to him. Then, he took a step forward, and used his huge palms to smash anyone he saw. If he didn't like them, he would kick them. Along the way, the barbarians were thrown off their feet. The barbarians roared and roared continuously. The other barbarians who didn't know what was going on were stunned, and looked at each other in dismay. Under the pressure of Hui Yan, all the Black Fire Tribe's warriors seemed to have become listless. With sullen faces, they obediently handed over the loot they had just obtained. In the blink of an eye, there was a huge pile of loot on the ground. Lu Chen looked at this scene from the side. He had a whole new level of respect for Hui Yan. He could tell that this person should be a person of great prestige in the Black Fire Tribe. So many fierce warriors actually didn't dare to make a sound in front of him. Not long after, almost all the loot from the Black Fire Tribe was piled up on the ground. Hui Yan's expression didn't look too good. No matter what, these bones were his own. He didn't feel good about throwing them away. Normally, he wouldn't do this even if he was beaten to death. But at this moment, things were different. As the leader of the tribe, his vision was much better than those subordinates who only knew how to fight, rob, and roar. This mysterious human possessed the power of black flames. In that instant, Hui Yan felt as if he had been blessed by his ancestors. He firmly believed that he had not done anything wrong. "These things are for you. We have helped you in this battle for nothing. Let us go." Hui Yan stood in front of the pile of spoils of war. His expression was steely, and he seemed to be gnashing his teeth as he spoke. The 3 leaders on the opposite side were shocked. The other barbarian warriors in the surroundings also became restless. Their eyes were filled with greed. The southern wilderness was barren and harsh. It was a good thing to have something in one's hands, even if it was snatched from the hands of the dead. The 3 leaders didn't expect the Black Fire Tribe to make such a big concession. It should be known that in all the tribal wars in the wilderness, the most important thing was to divide the spoils of war. Everyone fought and bled, just to get more food, weapons, and other useful things. Perhaps the top few powerful tribes didn't care about these small things because they occupied the best resources in the wilderness and had the support of the terrifying shamans. But at least for the middle and lower level tribes, the things that the Black Fire tribe threw out were the fundamental reason for them to start the war. Almost everyone was tempted. The only one who was still somewhat clear-headed was the leader of the Ghost Eye tribe. But before he could object, Hui Yan had already started to divide the spoils. He grabbed and threw the spoils of war directly into the crowd on the opposite side. Immediately, a large group of barbarian warriors started to fight for them. However, he didn't know if it was intentional or not, but most of the items he threw landed on the Thunder Lizard tribe, and a small portion landed on the Divine Wood tribe. As for the Ghost Eye tribe, they didn't even have a single item. Of course, this immediately aroused the dissatisfaction and public anger of the Ghost Eye tribe. Angry shouts immediately came out. The barbarian warriors of the Ghost Eye tribe looked at the excited faces of the people from the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Divine Wood tribe who got the spoils of war, and their eyes turned red. However, Hui Yan's actions were extremely fast. He quickly threw out the last of the items, then waved his hand and led the rest of the Black Fire tribe to surround Lu Chen and Atu as they retreated down the sand dune. At the same time, Hui Yan walked at the back, his eyes shining as he stared at those people as they slowly retreated. There was a commotion among the three tribes on the sand dune. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe cursed and was the first to rush out. But after a few steps, he suddenly stopped and looked back. He saw that the people of the other two tribes were still standing in the same place. The people of the Divine Wood tribe looked left and right. When they saw the Thunder Lizard tribe, there was envy in their eyes, but when they saw the Ghost Eye tribe, they suddenly felt a sense of superiority. After hesitating a few times, no one moved forward. As for the Thunder Lizard tribe, so many good things suddenly appeared on the ground. Originally, they had to bleed, sweat, and even risk their lives to get them. Only an idiot would follow the idiots of the Ghost Eye tribe and risk their lives. Therefore, a large group of people from the Thunder Lizard tribe were desperately fighting for the things on the ground. It looked like a group of dogs fighting for meat and bones. They didn't even look at the people of the Ghost Eye tribe. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe flew into a rage and cursed loudly. He looked back at the retreating people of the Black Fire tribe and the tall and fierce figure. After hesitating for a while, he finally sighed and didn't chase after them. If he chased after them now, without the help of the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Divine Wood tribe, it would be equivalent to the Ghost Eye tribe fighting against the Black Fire tribe. Not to mention the fact that the outcome was uncertain. Even if the Ghost Eye tribe won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. At that time, they would inexplicably lose the lives of more than half of the warriors of the tribe. If they couldn't destroy the Black Fire tribe, they would definitely have a blood feud with them. Most importantly, the Black Fire tribe had already F*King thrown out most of the things they had seized. Even if the Ghost Eye tribe won this battle, they wouldn't get many benefits. How could they fight this battle? No matter how they looked at it, they were at a disadvantage. There were many barbarians in the southern wilderness who risked their lives for revenge. But if the leader of a tribe was like that, his tribe would have been destroyed long ago. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe hadn't encountered such a depressing situation for a long time. He looked at the backs of the people of the Black Fire tribe gradually getting further and further away, and then looked at the two tribes behind him who were still gloating. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe looked up to the sky and sighed. "Priests, those are priests," he said with a sad face, "a bunch of idiots." Chapter 291. After safely leaving the sand dune and the battlefield, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe led Lu Chen and Atsu into the depths of the wilderness. Along the way, the atmosphere of the entire team was very stiff. Every time, there would be malicious gazes directed at Lu Chen, as if they wanted to devour this weak human. Lu Chen was relatively calm about this. Perhaps he was just hiding his true thoughts in his heart. However, Atu's reaction was much more direct. He was very sensitive to the hostile gazes around him. Every time someone looked at him, he would grit his teeth and stare back angrily. He looked like he was about to devour someone. Strangely, despite Atsu's ferocious demeanor, the barbarian warriors were not angry at all. They looked at Lu Chen with disgust, but when they saw Atsu, their expressions changed. Most of them were actually appreciative. Some even pointed at Atsu and nodded, praising the ferocity of this black wolf. It could be considered as the best demon beast in the wilderness. It was a pity that the heavens were blind, and such a good beast had been taken in by a piece of trash. While saying such contemptuous words and glancing at the disdainful gazes, everyone revealed a look of regret and pain. This caused Lu Chen to be speechless as he quietly observed the situation around him, and at the same time secretly pondering how to escape. After walking for about 2 hours, the Black Fire Tribe's team rested in a boxwood forest unique to the wilderness. This type of boxwood had a very strange appearance. At first glance, it looked very haggard, and the branches were also bare. At most, there were a few yellow leaves, and it looked like it was about to wither. But in fact, this kind of tree could survive in this desolate wilderness for thousands of years with this pitiful appearance. During this break, Hui Yan and Lu Chen had a conversation. Hui Yan asked about Lu Chen's background, and Lu Chen asked about where they were taking him. Hui Yan was probably not used to conversing with Lu Chen in such a polite manner, especially since Lu Chen did not answer him honestly. Instead, he asked many questions in return. There were a few times when Lu Chen clearly felt that the burly and fierce barbarian had the urge to go berserk, roar, and punch and kick to increase his power. Judging from the way the surrounding barbarian warriors quietly retreated, Lu Chen's feelings seemed to be right. But for some unknown reason, Hui Yan, this seemingly violent and ferocious barbarian, actually managed to suppress his violent temper in this first formal conversation with Lu Chen. Not only did he not touch a single hair on Lu Chen's head, he even answered all of Lu Chen's questions. From this, Lu Chen learned that the Black Fire Tribe was indeed a great tribe with a glorious history. In the vast wasteland of the southern border, among the countless barbarian tribes, only 7 of the strongest tribes had ever produced a supreme expert like the shaman. Without exception, all of them had mastered the most powerful source of power in the southern barbarian witchcraft. And the Black Fire Tribe was one of them. The shaman that once appeared in the Black Fire Tribe was respectfully called the Fire Shaman. When Lu Chen heard the words, Fire Shaman, his heart was filled with an indescribable feeling of absurdity. It was as if he suddenly saw fate smiling evilly at him. However, his many years as a shadow allowed him to hide this strange and indescribable feeling in his heart, not revealing it. And when Hui Yan asked him about his origins, Lu Chen did not hesitate too much. He very naturally and smoothly told the barbarian leader that he was adventuring in the disorienting lands a few days ago, and accidentally found a dilapidated village in the depths of the disorienting lands. Of course, there was a barbarian village inside, and he coincidentally obtained the Vulcan's staff at that time. When Lu Chen said this, he also recalled the layout of the village to Hui Yan, as well as some of the totems and patterns that he remembered being drawn all over the village. When he heard this, Hui Yan was so excited that he could not help but stand up. Not only him, but the surrounding warriors also gathered around, their faces filled with disbelief. Some of them were so excited that their bodies were trembling slightly. Unfortunately, Lu Chen did not give these barbarian warriors too much hope. He very definitely told them that everyone in the village had died. And in a moment of compassion, he took care of and fed the dying old shaman a few mouthfuls of water. The old shaman gave him half a wooden staff and said that it was called the Vulcan's staff. He asked him to bring it back to the southern wilderness and return it to the Vulcan. Halfway through his speech, Hui Yan and the surrounding barbarian warriors of the Black Fire Tribe were so excited that they could not control themselves. The original suspicion on their faces had disappeared in an instant. When they heard Lu Chen's words, especially when they heard that the old shaman still struggled to urge Lu Chen to bring the Vulcan staff back to the wilderness, the warriors of the Black Fire Tribe all burst into tears. Some growled, some roared, some wailed, and some even pounded their chests, kneeled on the ground, banging their heads on the ground. They did not even realize that they were bleeding. The onlookers were all trembling, as if they had committed a grave mistake and could not control themselves. Among the crowd, even Hui Yan, who seemed to be the calmest and most composed, had tears in his eyes. His body trembled as he slowly turned to face the north. Looking at the endless land and the vast sky, he knelt on the ground with a thud and pounded his hands on the ground. He mumbled incomprehensibly, choking with sobs. Looking at the large group of barbarian warriors who were behaving strangely and weeping, Lu Chen was once again speechless. Although he did not know the history of the Black Fire tribe, but from the looks of it, it was clear that the small barbarian village that was destroyed was inextricably linked to the Black Fire tribe. As for why these barbarians were so agitated, he did not know. After a long while, the surrounding barbarian warriors slowly returned to normal. But many of them still had expressions of sadness and pain on their faces, and their eyes were red. But to be honest, with the ferocious appearance of the barbarians, at this moment, they did not look sad at all. Instead, they looked even more ferocious, like beasts with red eyes after being angered. After this torment, not only Hui Yan, but even the barbarian warriors who originally hated Lu Chen looked at Lu Chen with much friendlier eyes. There was no longer so much hostility, as if the distance between them had suddenly been shortened. But compared to the other simple-minded Black Fire tribe warriors, Hui Yan, the leader, was obviously more intelligent. In his excitement, he still remembered to ask Lu Chen, for thousands of years, no human has been able to cross the land of chaos to reach the southern wilderness. So, how did you get here? This question was not easy to answer. He definitely could not tell the truth. That seed was Lu Chen's biggest secret. Therefore, Lu Chen could only make up a story. He only said that after burying the old priest, he left the village. Not long after, he was chased by ferocious beasts and fell into the terrifying Dragon River. In the middle of it, he encountered an even more ferocious and unimaginably terrifying giant beast in the river, and was knocked unconscious. He thought that he would definitely die, but before he fainted, he vaguely felt that half of the fire god's staff suddenly lit up, and a mysterious light enveloped his whole body. After that, he did not know. When he woke up, he was already in the southern wilderness. What happened next was that he accidentally saw the battle between the four tribes. There were many flaws in this story, but to the Black Fire tribe, it was surprisingly effective. They almost immediately believed it without a doubt. With Hui Yan as the leader, the barbarian warriors immediately knelt down, and then made a strange but solemn salute to the sky, loudly praising the supreme glory and power of the fire god. Lu Chen stood at the side and silently looked at this tribe that believed in the fire god. Suddenly, he thought of the fanatics of the Three Realms demonic cult that he had seen in the vast land of the Divine Land. Although the races were different and the things that they believed in were completely different, at this moment, in Lu Chen's mind, their figures actually overlapped. In this life, Lu Chen had never believed in any gods. If he did not have such an unwavering belief, he would have long collapsed in the demonic cult. At this moment, he naturally had no respect for the so-called fire god. He just subconsciously felt that it was a little strange. At the same time, since he came to the southern wilderness, it seemed that everything was too coincidental. After getting the fire god's staff, he encountered a tribe that had the inheritance of the Black Fire tribe. If it were not for his strong will, if it were someone else, they might really suspect that all this was arranged by that god. For the rest of the journey, many warriors of the Black Fire tribe were much more polite to Lu Chen. They no longer looked at him with hostility. Instead, they often looked at him with reverence. Lu Chen knew why, because he often saw the barbarian warriors looking at the fire god's staff in his hand with the same kind of gaze. That should be the artifact that belonged to the fire god, right? Hui Yan once asked him to check the fire god's staff, and Lu Chen gave it to him. Hui Yan took it carefully, and after rubbing it repeatedly, it could be seen that he wanted to use his own power to activate the fire god's staff, so that it would show the powerful Black Fire god's miracle. But unfortunately, the fire god seemed to ignore him, and the fire god's staff did not respond. At this moment, Hui Yan seemed to have suddenly become smarter. He actually shamelessly called all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe together and tried it out one by one. The Black Fire tribe was the tribe that admired the fire god the most. They were the direct descendants of the fire god's power, so there would definitely be people that were favored by the fire god. No one said anything about this. However, in this subtle atmosphere, if there really was someone who was favored by the fire god, that humans seemed to be dispensable after completing the mission of returning the fire god. Chapter 292. Gods were aloof, temperamental, unpredictable, mysterious, and ethereal. For so many years, gods that almost no one had ever seen were said to have the greatest requirement for their worshippers to be obedient. As long as they were obedient, there was no need to guess the actions of the gods. Because you would never guess. For example, the fire god was an ancient god that only the Black Fire tribe worshipped. All of his worshippers were in this tribe, while the human race was thousands of miles away. But at this critical moment, the fire god seemed to have abandoned his most loyal worshippers. The fire god's staff did not react to any of the barbarian warriors of the fire god tribe, even if they used all kinds of methods, including the methods passed down from ancient times. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe were all gritting their teeth and sweating profusely, but in the end, they did not succeed. Lu Qin stood at the side and looked at this scene coldly. For a moment, he was puzzled. In his hand, the fire god's staff would only react when he used the power of the Black Fire. This was probably because the two came from the same source. However, that was the extent of his understanding of the fire god's staff. Looking at the sorry state of the Black Fire tribe warriors, he started to have more doubts about the fire god. A god didn't believe in his own believers and people, and instead favored an unrelated person? This matter really didn't make sense no matter how he explained it. After a while, Hui Yan walked over awkwardly and returned the fire god's staff to Lu Qin. Lu Qin thought for a moment, but did not take it. Instead, he said to him, "You should be able to tell that I am not a priest." Hui Yan was startled, and his face turned serious. He said in a low voice, "Why?" Lu Qin pointed at the fire god's staff and said, "If this fire god's staff is a treasure of your tribe, then you can take it back. There is no need to give it to me." Hui Yan didn't expect Lu Qin to say this and was momentarily stunned. He heard Lu Qin continue, "I've already told you what happened before. Although I don't know why the fire god you mentioned chose me, since I've returned the fire god's staff to you, I think I've completed my mission." He looked at Hui Yan and calmly said, "Take this treasure back." "I don't want it." "Then, I'll leave this place myself. What do you think?" Hui Yan's expression changed. Some of the barbarian warriors nearby who heard their conversation were also stunned. However, after pondering silently for a moment, Hui Yan looked around at the barbarian warriors and shook his head. He stuffed the fire god's staff into Lu Qin's hands and said, "This won't do. Since the fire god has chosen you, he must have his reasons." As he spoke, he turned to the surrounding Black Fire warriors and said loudly, "I've thought about it. The reason why we were unable to reignite the fire god's staff is because we committed a huge mistake in the past. The fire god still wants to punish us." "Who?" There was a commotion among the warriors, but when Lu Qin looked over, many of them had a look of sudden understanding and nodded their heads, as if they had been woken up by Hui Yan's words. Then, when they looked at Lu Qin's side again, their faces were filled with respect. It really seemed like they were looking at a priest. Lu Qin felt somewhat helpless. Just as he was about to say something, Hui Yan had already turned around and pulled Lu Qin back without batting an eyelid. Lu Qin understood and followed him to a secluded area where there were fewer people. Hui Yan said in a low voice, "Lu Qin, I don't care about your background or identity. But you can clearly see the current situation. Since you're here, follow me back to the tribe. At the very least, you have to meet our tribe leader. When that time comes, we'll listen to the tribe leader's decision." "Tribe leader?" Lu Qin frowned. Hui Yan nodded his head in response. Then, he slowed down and said in a low voice, "You're after all a human, not a barbarian. In this southern wilderness, only our Black Fire tribe has no enmity towards you and can protect you a little. If you leave, once people from other tribes see you, there will immediately be a bloodbath. Unless you leave the wilderness, otherwise, there will be no end. He looked at Lu Chen and said, even if you have some ability, but if this goes on, there will be a day when you can't hold on. Lu Chen was silent, but in his heart, he had to admit that this seemingly rough and fierce barbarian's words were indeed very reasonable. The way back was blocked by the great snow mountain and the abyss of primal chaos. The great river of the Dragon River was even more dangerous. With his current ability, it was impossible for him to cross it. Not to mention that apart from the strange black fire in his body, his original Tao techniques and divine arts were almost completely crippled due to the chaos of the 5 elemental spiritual energies. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, Lu Chen sighed and nodded, all right. The Black Fire tribe's location was not too far from them. They arrived at the tribe's location in the evening. Under the dim night sky, Lu Chen saw from afar that the Black Fire tribe's camp was actually built on flat ground without any cover. There were some stones piled up around it as a wall, which could barely be considered as a defense. But looking at the height of the stone wall, it was estimated that it could only defend against some small beasts passing by in the wilderness. If there were really enemies, it would be useless. They could only rely on the tribe's warriors to fight with their flesh and blood. It was probably because of this that the elite warriors of the Blackfire tribe didn't dare to leave their tribe too far. The battlefield couldn't be more than a day's journey away from their tribe. They were afraid that if something happened to the tribe, it would be too late for them to rush back. Probably hearing the movements of the Blackfire tribe's warriors returning, there was a sudden commotion in the originally quiet Blackfire tribe. Then, many barbarians ran out and welcomed them. Suddenly, there were cheers and shouts at the entrance of the camp. Many women and children who stayed behind to guard the camp finally saw the people they wanted to see after being on tenterhooks for a long time. For a moment, there were all kinds of hugs and laughter, showing that even the fierce and barbaric barbarians had a human side. In this process, Lu Chen suddenly realized something that he had neglected before. Everyone was smiling. Until he walked into the camp, he did not see anyone crying or wailing in sorrow. At most, there were people who were injured and were asked about their well-being. This meant that in that fierce battle, the warriors of the Blackfire tribe seemed to have not suffered any losses, and actually managed to escape unscathed. For a moment, Lu Chen could not help but look at the tribal warriors in a new light. At that time, he hid on the hill and watched the battle below. The tragic scene was still fresh in his memory. Now, it seemed that although the Blackfire tribe seemed to be in a difficult and unfavorable situation, to be able to struggle and survive in such a harsh wasteland, they had their own unique qualities. While Lu Chen was secretly observing these barbarians, the people of the Blackfire tribe also began to notice that there was suddenly a stranger with a strange appearance among the returning troops. His appearance was very different from that of a barbarian. Very soon, someone thought of the legendary human race of the north, and immediately, someone cried out in surprise. This cry alarmed even more people. In a moment, many barbarians of the Blackfire tribe surrounded him, most of them were women and children. The women were very cautious and kept a distance from Lu Chen, but the barbarian children were unscrupulous. Many of them came closer to look at Lu Chen, shouting excitedly. Some of the bolder ones even stretched out their legs to kick him. It seemed that the education of the Blackfire tribe was very bad for the human race. There were even some who pulled out palm-sized knives and stabbed at him while screaming. This behavior immediately shocked the barbarian warriors who escorted Lu Chen back. Although Lu Chen was a human, the fire god liked him. In an instant, more than a dozen barbarian warriors surrounded them, scolding, chasing away those reckless brats. Among them, the most conspicuous one was Hui Yan's tall and sturdy body. The leader of the barbarian warriors jumped over and directly grabbed the tallest and strongest child, who was also the only one who pulled out a knife and was about to stab someone. He slapped the child to the ground, then grabbed one of the child's legs and lifted him up. The child was not afraid of him, and was still struggling in midair. He held the knife and waved it at Lu Chen, shouting, "Let me go, let me chop off his head and put it on the roof of father's house." Hui Yan's face darkened as he cursed. He stretched out his hand and tossed the little boy away. The child fell to the ground and rolled a few times, but his skin was surprisingly sturdy. He flipped over and jumped up again, still cursing and shouting, "Father, why didn't you let me kill him? Isn't he a human?" "Shut up!" Hui Yan scolded, then signaled Lu Chen to follow him. Lu Chen and Atsu followed behind him, walking deeper into the tribe. At this moment, when everyone saw this scene, they naturally knew that Lu Chen's identity was somewhat different from others, so they did not say anything. Only the child still looked very fierce, staring at Lu Chen with an unconvinced expression. When they walked past the child, Lu Chen glanced at him, and saw that the child was still trying his best to show a fierce expression, glaring at him fiercely. He could not help but laugh, and said to Hui Yan, "Your son." Hui Yan coughed and said, an idiot." The child was furious, but did not dare to get angry at his father. Instead, he pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, "I'm not an idiot, let me fight him one-on-one. Watch me chop off his head and put it on father's, shut up." Hui Yan's nose was almost crooked from anger, and he said angrily, "The others are all fine, only you keep shouting, what are you doing?" At this moment, they came to the front of a large stone house, and a slightly hunched figure walked out from the dark house. The child immediately seemed to have met his savior, jumping over and grabbing that person's hand, shouting, "Grandpa, Grandpa, look at father, he won't let me kill this hateful human." Chapter 293. Lu Chen raised his eyes and looked at the old man. At first glance, he felt that he looked somewhat familiar. Of course, it was absolutely impossible for him to have met this old barbarian who had spent his entire life in the southern wilderness. After carefully sizing him up for a moment, Lu Chen knew where that strange feeling came from. From the outline of his face, the old barbarian's facial features were somewhat similar to Hui Yan's. However, Hui Yan was in the prime of his life, and his energy, qi, and spirit were all at their peak, giving off a ferocious and valiant aura. On the other hand, it was hard to tell the age of this old barbarian, but he was obviously very old. Not only was his body hunched, his face was also lethargic, and a few large age spots had appeared on his thin face, making him look somewhat gloomy. Other than making people think that these two should be father and son, Lu Chen also thought of another barbarian. It was the one that he and Xian had seen in the Demon Flower Valley at the periphery of the disorienting lands. He was the cruel and vicious old barbarian who had been banished by the tribe because of his old age. It was probably because both of them were very old, and in the eyes of humans, barbarians all looked the same and were equally fierce. However, the old barbarian who was killed by Lu Chen was killed because the environment in the disorienting lands was too harsh, causing the tribe there to adopt the terrifying practice of banishing the elderly. Although the southern wilderness also looked desolate, the conditions here were obviously much better than in the disorienting lands. At least when Lu Chen walked into the camp of the Black Fire tribe, he saw many old barbarians. However, when the old barbarian looked at Lu Chen and heard Hui Yan call him father, and the other barbarian warriors saluted him and called him chief, Lu Chen suddenly frowned. The old chief of the Black Fire tribe had a very heavy aura of lethargy. Even the dying old priest of the barbarian tribe in the disorienting lands looked more spirited than him. Human. Although the old barbarian looked very old, when his grandson grabbed his hand, he still showed a happy and gratified smile. However, after listening to the boy's complaint, the old barbarian raised his head and looked at Lu Chen. His expression immediately changed, and a look of shock appeared on his face as he let out a cry. Hui Yan, who was at the side, walked forward and whispered a few words into the old tribe leader's ear. The old barbarian was startled for a moment, but it seemed that he valued Hui Yan's son very much. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded and agreed. After that, the old barbarian turned around and walked back to his stone house. Hui Yan waved his hand at Lu Chen, indicating for him to enter with him. Lu Chen nodded his head and followed behind. Atsu followed behind him, but at the entrance, Hui Yan glanced at the gigantic black wolf demonic beast and said to Lu Chen, "Let it wait outside." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but still agreed. He rubbed Atsu's head and said, "Wait for me at the entrance, I'll come out in a moment." Atsu glanced at him, wagged its tail, and squatted down at the entrance. Then, Lu Chen and Hui Yan walked in. As soon as the figures of these people disappeared, the atmosphere in the Black Fire tribe became much more relaxed. Some of the relatives who had reunited with each other returned home, some stood together and laughed. Most of the children in the tribe were running around, showing a little bit of a happy atmosphere. Atsu looked at this unfamiliar place in boredom. Suddenly, a figure flashed in front of it. It was the boy who had spoken the loudest just now, Hui Yan's son. He stood in front of it with a scrutinizing look on his face. He looked at this gigantic demonic beast, which was rarely seen in the wilderness, with a hint of curiosity and passion in his eyes. Atsu snorted and barked a few times. He lifted his head warily and looked at the young berserker. After entering the stone house, Lu Chen looked around and found that the furnishings in the house were extremely simple. There was a wooden bed, a stone cabinet, and a piece of animal skin. That seemed to be all. In the middle of the house, there was a pit. There were a few charcoal fires burning in the pit, and 3 wooden supports were propped up on top of it. A black clay pot hung from it. From time to time, there would be a crackling sound coming from the pot. It was unknown what was being burned. This was the place where the tribe leader lived, but it was already so simple. It was easy to imagine the situation in other places. It seemed that the Black Fire tribe was not in a good situation. However, neither the old barbarian tribe leader nor Hui Yan had any reaction to this. They were probably used to it. After entering the house, the old tribe leader sat down at one end of the fire pit. Hui Yan let Lu Chen sit on the other side, and then he knelt down beside the old tribe leader. He began to tell the tribe leader, who was also his father, in detail about the beginning and process of this matter. During this time, he even motioned to Lu Chen and asked for the fire god's staff, handing it over to the old tribe leader for him to see. Lu Chen was silent, but his eyes were secretly observing the 2 barbarians. From their conversation, he found out that the old tribe leader was called Fire Tiger. An old and ferocious tiger. As the old Fire Tiger listened to his son Hui Yan's narration, his gaze occasionally swept past Lu Chen's face, and then looked at the fire god's staff in his hand. At this time, it was difficult to see any special emotions in his expression. Apart from the reverence that came from the bottom of his heart, there was also a reverence towards the legendary fire god. As Hui Yan continued to narrate, there was a faint trace of excitement on his face. This was because he had already begun to talk about the most important matter. He believed that Lu Chen was favored by the fire god, and that the fire god must have bestowed a gift to the Black Fire tribe. Therefore, he was the priest that the Black Fire tribe had dreamed of for many years. As long as they had a priest, the Black Fire tribe that had been weak for many years would have hoped to rise again. At this point, Hui Yan's voice even began to tremble. It was obvious that to him, this goal was the most important matter that he had thought about day and night. Compared to the excitement of his young and strong son, Hui Yan's expression was much calmer than his gratitude towards the fire god's gift. Perhaps it was because he had lived for a long time, but his thoughts were heavier. When he looked at Lu Chen, there was a heavy suspicion in his eyes. Lu Chen could see this, but it didn't matter. He had never really thought of becoming this priest of the Black Fire tribe. He wouldn't do it, and he didn't want to do it. At this moment, Lu Chen couldn't wait for the Fire Tiger tribe leader to give the order to chase him out. This way, everyone would have less trouble. When Hui Yan finally finished telling his father about the course of events and his lofty aspirations, the aged Fire Tiger pondered silently for a long time. He did not agree, nor did he object. Instead, he suddenly opened his mouth to ask Lu Chen, "Do you have anything to say?" Lu Chen glanced at him and sneered in his heart, but his expression did not change. He calmly said, "I have already told Hui Yan what I wanted to say. First, it was an accident that I came to the southern wilderness. I never thought of bringing the fire god's staff here. Second, I have no intention of being a priest in the Black Fire tribe. As long as you allow me, I can leave now." He paused for a moment before continuing, "This fire god's staff isn't of much use to me. If it really is an important treasure of the Black Fire tribe, I can keep it and give it to you." Originally, Flaming Tiger's expression was somewhat gloomy and tense. However, when he heard Lu Chen's last sentence, he was startled for a moment. Immediately after, his expression eased up a little. But Hui Yan, who was sitting beside him, was somewhat anxious. He said in a low voice, "Lu Chen, don't talk nonsense. All the coincidences that you came here were all arranged by the fire god. Moreover, apart from you, no one else can activate the power of the fire god's staff. All of this must be the fire god's decision to let you be our Black Fire tribe's priest." Lu Chen was somewhat speechless. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Looking at Hui Yan's serious expression, he didn't know what to say for a moment. Hui Yan also frowned. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head again. Using his withered palm, he gently stroked the fire god's staff. There was hesitation and contemplation on his face. Hui Yan, who was at the side, saw that his father seemed to be wavering. He immediately became somewhat anxious. Just as he was about to urgently persuade him again, suddenly, at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the stone house. A roar was heard, followed by a series of exclamations from near and far. There was also a somewhat shrill scream mixed together. The three people in the stone house were all startled. Each of them had heard a familiar voice. The shrill scream belonged to Hui Yan's son, and the low and angry roar belonged to Atsu. As for the other cries of alarm, they belonged to the surrounding barbarians of the Black Fire tribe. Hui Yan and Lu Chen immediately stood up from the ground. After looking at each other, they immediately strode outside. While Hui Yan was also shocked, he followed them out of the house. Once outside, a horrifying scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Not far from the stone house, a huge black wolf was roaring and pouncing on the barbarian youth. At this moment, two of Atsu's huge front claws were pressed on the youth's shoulders. A terrifying bloody mouth with incomparably sharp, blade-like fangs had already stretched out towards the youth's throat. The youth was already so scared that his face had turned pale. His whole body was trembling slightly, but he seemed to still have some of the innate valiance of the barbarians. Surprisingly, he did not cry. Instead, he clenched his teeth and struggled with all his might. But under the suppression of this huge monster, it was completely useless. The surrounding barbarians turned pale with fright. Many warriors immediately pulled out their weapons, but they did not dare to approach. They were afraid that if they were not careful, they would accidentally anger this monster. The consequences would be unimaginable. Lu Chen's face slightly darkened, but he still rushed over and shouted, "Atsu, don't be reckless." Atsu turned its head and saw that it was Lu Chen. Its eyes slightly softened, but it still growled in a low voice. It seemed to be very angry. Hui Yan stood behind Lu Chen. His face was a little anxious, but he did not dare to act rashly. He could only watch as Lu Chen held Atsu's head and slowly comforted it. When Atsu calmed down, Hui Yan's face regained some calmness. He said in a low voice, "Let go of the child first." Chapter 294. Lu Chen glanced at him, then nodded. He held Atsu's head in his arms, hugged it tightly, and then slowly pulled it back. Atsu let out a low growl, seemingly unwilling, but seeing that Lu Chen's expression was especially resolute, it hesitated for a moment, then finally followed Lu Chen's lead and slowly retreated. Even its front paws slowly left the youth's shoulder. The surrounding Black Fire tribe members all widened their eyes, their expressions nervous. The youth didn't even dare to breathe loudly, afraid that he would suddenly startle this huge beast, and in the blink of an eye, it would be a bloody disaster. Seeing the huge black wolf slowly retreat a few feet under Lu Chen's advice, Hui Yan, who had been waiting on the side for a long time, suddenly rushed forward and pulled the youth up from the ground. Then, with a clean and neat roll, in the blink of an eye, they were already several feet away from the huge black wolf. The surrounding Black Fire tribe members immediately let out a cry of relief. Then, 7 or 8 warriors immediately held their swords and stood between the two sides, fiercely looking at Lu Chen and Atsu. Lu Chen frowned, but didn't say anything. On the other side, Hui Yan pulled the youth up, and the chief Hua who also came over. The two looked at the boy with concern, and asked in unison, Huaying, are you all right? The barbarian youth called Huaying suddenly jumped up from the ground. The original fear on his face disappeared, and was replaced with shame and anger. He pointed at Atsu and shouted, Dad, kill it, kill it. Lu Chen's expression suddenly darkened, and Huayan frowned. Before he could say anything, Huaying had already run to Huahu's side, grabbed his hand, and shouted, Grandpa, this black wolf wants to kill me, it wants to kill me. I definitely won't let it go, kill it. Ever since it entered the Black Fire tribe, it didn't provoke anyone but you. The one who spoke was Lu Chen. His eyes were cold as he asked. Huayan frowned. He turned around to look at his son and asked, What happened when we entered the house? The fire hawk froze for a moment, then shook its head with a resolute expression, shouting, I just saw that this black wolf looks pretty good, and I somewhat like it. I wanted to take it as a mount, but I didn't do anything else. Who knew that this beast would be so ferocious and almost killed me? If it wanted to kill you, you would be a dead man by now, Lu Chen said coldly. The fire hawk was speechless for a moment, and then he flew into a rage. He pointed at Lu Chen and roared, You lowly human, how dare you speak to me like this? Kill him, kill him. As he spoke, he shouted at the barbarian warriors around him, as if he was used to ordering others around. The strong barbarian warriors standing at the side looked at each other. Most of them didn't move, but secretly glanced at Huayan and Huahu. Only one or two tall and simple-minded men let out a roar, drew their blades, and ran out. Stop! A shout came from Huayan, stopping the two. Then, he looked to the side with a dark face, at the other people of the Black Fire tribe, and said loudly, Did you all see what happened just now? Was it just like what the Fire Hawk said? The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe that he looked at, whether they were the warriors, the old, the weak, the women, or the children, none of them responded. Some of them even looked a little embarrassed. Huayan's face darkened even more. He pointed at a tall barbarian warrior with especially thick arms, and shouted, Tai Xiong, you speak. The warrior called Tai Xiong rolled his eyes, looked at the Fire Hawk, then looked at Huayan, and said in a muffled voice, It was Little Hawk who liked this black wolf and wanted to tame it. But the black wolf was too wild and refused. Little Hawk used the method we usually use to deal with wild wolves. He used a knife to stab it, but he was careless and was knocked down by the wolf. Huayan was furious. He turned to the Fire Hawk and scolded, This black wolf has an owner, why did you touch it? The Fire Hawk was a little scared after being scolded by Huayan. He shrank back a little, but an old hand reached out and hugged him, patting his shoulder comfortingly. It was his grandfather, Huahu. Huayan leaned on his grandfather, and his courage grew a lot. He straightened his neck and shouted, That's just a lowly human. Sooner or later, we will kill him. Also, such a good black wolf is rare in the entire wasteland. Of course, we will take it into our tribe. If we can tame it in the future, it will be a great help to us. Nonsense. Huayan was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He took 2 steps forward and was about to slap him. But at this time, Huahu frowned and suddenly stretched out his hand to stop him. He then said indifferently, Little Hawk is doing this for the good of the tribe. Isn't it just a demonic beast? It's no big deal. Huayan was startled and said in shock, Father, this is Lu Chen's black wolf. And what Little Hawk is doing is wrong, how can he, enough. Huahu waved his hand and interrupted his son's words. His gaze turned to Lu Chen, who was standing side by side with the huge black wolf. A trace of haze flashed in the depths of his eyes. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, You can leave. Father. Grandfather. Patriarch, several voices cried out at the same time, all of them filled with surprise. The only difference was that Huayan and the others had murderous looks on their faces, while Huayan was anxious. He hurriedly said to Huahu, Father, have you forgotten what I said to you just now? This is very likely the will of the fire god. It is the fire god who has once again given our black fire tribe an opportunity, giving us a chance to rise and become strong again. Just him. This voice was a little immature and resentful. It was the teenager Hui Yan who interrupted. Obviously, he was still brooding over the humiliation he had just received. Lu Chen glanced at the teenager and smiled coldly, not saying a word. Hui Yan's anger rose and he shouted at Hui Yan, "Shut up." Then, he turned his head to Hua Hua, lowered his voice, and earnestly said, "Father, don't you know how big the difference is between the tribes in the wasteland and whether they have priests or not? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, we must not miss it." The expression on Hua Hu's withered and old face fluctuated. In the end, he still shook his head and said with a cold expression, "Lu Chen, you are originally a human. According to reason, if a person like you comes to our tribe, killing you is already giving you satisfaction. But for the sake of the fire god's staff, we will let you go. You can go." Lu Chen replied with an, "Oh," and said, "Then I thank you very much." Hua Hu's face darkened. It seemed that he was very unhappy with Lu Chen's attitude of not thanking him and not kneeling down with his tail between his legs. However, he still endured it and coldly laughed dryly, saying, "As for the fire god's staff, it is a divine weapon of our black fire tribe. It will stay with us." After saying this, he waved his hand and raised his voice, shouting, "Drive him out of the camp." Seeing his grandfather stand up for him and resolutely reject his father's unreliable suggestion, ordering him to chase this hateful human out of the tribe, Fire Eagle almost jumped up in joy. Although he was a little regretful that he could not kill this hateful human in front of everyone, he could still vent his anger. Hua Ying waved his fist and followed Hua Hu's shout, "Drive him out, drive him out. If this person dares to resist, kill him for me." Hua Hu, the chief of the Black Fire tribe, who was standing next to him, suddenly froze, and his voice came to an abrupt halt. Hua Hu, the chief of the Black Fire tribe, who was standing next to him, suddenly turned ashen. All the barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe, those fierce and valiant men who seemed to be able to fight a demon beast on their own, actually did not stand up at this moment. Almost everyone stood in place, including the two people who wanted to rush out to vent Hui Ying's anger. The eyes of every tribal warrior were secretly looking at Hui Yan. The atmosphere of the entire Black Fire tribe instantly became cold and silent. Except for Hui Yan, almost all the barbarians' faces changed slightly, whether it was the warriors or the old, weak, women and children who were watching from the side. This was a scene that had never happened in the Black Fire tribe before. In the past, Hua Hu and Hui Yan were father and son. One was the chief, while the other was the chief of the warriors. Hui Yan was almost naturally recognized as the future chief. Everything seemed to come naturally, and everything seemed so smooth and natural. Until today, on this seemingly normal day, because of the sudden appearance of the human, the conflict between the father and son was suddenly placed in front of all the people of the Black Fire tribe. Then, the situation suddenly changed in an unexpected and strange way. All the warriors, even without any orders, all looked at Hui Yan in unison, even if the chief, Hua Hu, had publicly issued an order. Hui Yan seemed to feel nothing, coldly standing in the middle of the tribe's camp, not saying a word. He did not move, and all the warriors looked at each other. Surprisingly, no one moved. The atmosphere slowly became tense. Who knew how many people's heartbeats slowly sped up? Fire Eagle tightly grabbed his grandfather Fire Tiger's palm. He felt his heart suddenly beat so fast that it was frightening, thumping non-stop. At the same time, he suddenly felt that his grandfather's hand was as cold as ice. He secretly looked at his grandfather, only to see that this old man, who had been the chief of the Black Fire tribe for many years, was slowly looking around with an ashen face. His gaze swept across the faces of the Black Fire warriors. Every time he saw a Black Fire warrior, that person's gaze would be averted. Perhaps it was because of guilt, or perhaps it was because of nervousness, no one was willing to look him in the eye. But what made people despair was that even though he seemed to still have some prestige, not a single Black Fire warrior obeyed his orders. The old tiger had lost its claws, lost its fangs. In the end, it no longer had the power of the past. Hu finally retracted his gaze and looked at the center of the crowd, at the man who was as majestic as a mountain. Hu Yan raised his eyes and looked at his father. The gazes of the father and son met in midair. It was as if there was a sudden explosion of thunder in the silence. Chapter 295. Hu Yan's tall and sturdy body was like a small mountain standing in the middle of the Black Fire tribe. At this moment, countless gazes were fixed on him. Everyone held their breath. Everyone had a feeling that this man's next decision and action might decide the future of the Black Fire tribe. This was a sudden situation that no one had expected. Hu Yan's uncharacteristic silence also intensified the tense atmosphere. Father and son, the old chief and the young chief, seemed to be confronting each other. After an unknown amount of time, Hu Yan's body suddenly moved. The surrounding people of the Black Fire tribe were startled. Then, they saw Hu Yan stride forward, still maintaining his silence. His eyes looked forward, but he was slowly walking towards the old Hu. At this moment, countless Black Fire tribe barbarians changed their expressions. Even the brave warriors became nervous. Among them, the one who had the most drastic change in expression was Hu Ying. Hu's grandson, Hu Yan's son, and regarded as the third-generation chief of the Black Fire tribe, had a look of terror on his face. With a loud shout, he stood in front of his grandfather, Hu, and opened his arms to look at his father. He cried out in fear, "Father, are you crazy? What do you want?" The southern wilderness was a harsh place. Most of the barbarian tribes that lived here didn't have a good time. The warriors of each tribe were famous for their fierceness. But, this didn't mean that these barbarians were all simple-minded, united, and friendly people. The killing between the barbarian tribes was extremely cruel, and it was not uncommon for the same tribe to kill each other. Not to mention fighting within the same tribe, even killing between blood relatives was common. Compared to the other tribes that had internal strife, the Black Fire tribe had always been united for many years. After all, ever since they fled back to the wilderness after the 1,000-Year War, the tribe had been weak. Now, they could only struggle and live at the bottom of the wilderness. They did not have the capital to fight amongst themselves. If they did not unite, they would have been completely exterminated long ago. However, was this situation going to change today? As Hu Yan's heavy footsteps came closer and closer, Firehawk felt more and more pressure. Ever since he was young, he had worshipped and revered his father. Especially after his mother's early death, Hu Yan's nurturing of his son was completely from the perspective of a tribal warrior. Firehawk's greatest wish was to be qualified to take over his father's position in the future and lead the Black Fire tribe to continue surviving in the southern wilderness. If it was possible, he would make the tribe even stronger, kill even more enemies, and seize even more things. This was the Fire Eagle's current dream. In the tribe, the one who doted on him the most was his grandfather, Fire Tiger. Firehawk had never thought that one day, his grandfather, who doted on him the most, might actually have a conflict with the father he respected the most. He stood in front of his grandfather in a daze, not knowing what to do. He looked at the tall figure of his father who was already standing in front of him in horror. His body began to tremble slightly, but even now, he still had no intention of leaving. The young man clenched his teeth and gasped for breath. He forced himself to stand between the two closest relatives in the world and opened his arms, wanting to stop them from really starting a conflict. Hu Yan's gaze left his father Fire Tiger's face and lowered his head to look at his son. The young man's face was very much like his own, stubbornness with a hint of fierceness and a hint of pleading in his eyes. With an expressionless face, he stretched out his hand and with a "pa" sound, Firehawk cried out in fear and staggered to the side. In the next moment, there was finally no more obstruction between Hu Yan and Fire Tiger. The two generations of Black Fire tribe chiefs finally stood face to face. The Black Fire tribe was deathly silent, as if even the drop of a needle could be heard. Unlike the faintly frightened expressions of the surrounding Black Fire tribe barbarians, including his grandson Fire Eagle, the old Fire Tiger, although his expression was stern from beginning to end, did not show the slightest hint of fear. On the contrary, as he looked at this tall and burly son who was slowly approaching him, a strange light quietly flashed across the depths of his eyes. Perhaps it was because he was too old and had experienced too much, but this old man had long seen through everything. He had let go of life and death, so he was no longer afraid. Or perhaps, he was just a simple barbarian, simple and pure. Thus, everyone heard Fire Tiger speak first. He asked Hui Yan, "What do you want?" Hui Yan looked straight into his father's eyes. At that moment, his heart seemed to suddenly throb. Many years ago, when he was also a young man, he looked up to his father just like Fire Eagle did now. Perhaps even his childhood wish was exactly the same. But, who could imagine what would happen many years later? Even barbarians could not predict their lives. Hui Yan lowered his head slightly. After a moment, he said in a low voice, "Give me the fire god's staff." Fire Tiger's expression finally changed. He stared at Hui Yan for a moment, then handed over the fire god's staff. At the same time, he said indifferently, "What, you want the position of tribe leader?" In the barbarian tribe, other than the priest who was known as the soul of the tribe, or the higher-ranking shaman, the most important people in the tribe were usually the tribe leader and the chief. The tribe leader was the leader of the tribe, overseeing the overall situation. The chief was usually the commander of the tribe's warriors, leading the warriors to fight to the death. He was the strongest military commander in the tribe, and his position in the tribe was only below the tribe leader. For many years, the tradition of the Black Fire tribe had been passed down by the son after the death of the father. The father was the tribe leader, and the son became the chief of the warriors. Under the gaze of all the Black Fire tribe barbarians, Hui Yan reached out and took the fire god's staff. The half of the staff, known as the fire god's divine weapon, lay quietly in his palm. He looked at his father, Fire Tiger, and shook his head, saying, "You think too much." He paused for a moment, then said, "I will send him away." After saying these two sentences, the tall and majestic barbarian turned around and strode in front of Lu Chen, saying, "Let's go." Lu Chen had seen everything that had happened between the father and son. At this moment, he could not understand what Hui Yan was thinking. But no matter what, leaving the Black Fire tribe was obviously a good thing for him, so Lu Chen did not hesitate and agreed. Then, he brought Atsu and followed behind Hui Yan, slowly walking out of the Black Fire tribe's camp. At this moment, the people of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be able to catch their breath. Suddenly, there was an uproar, and many people began to whisper among themselves. At the same time, there were many people who secretly glanced at Hui Yan. Hui Yan turned a blind eye to these gazes. His pair of old and muddy eyes only stared at the backs of Hui Yan and Lu Chen. Even when Huiying came over to support him, Hui Yan did not have much of a reaction. Huiying was a little scared, and called out in a low voice, "Grandpa." Hui Yan suddenly grabbed Huiying's hand tightly. Huiying's body trembled, and he suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. He suddenly realized that this seemingly old grandfather of his was shockingly strong. And just as he was shocked, he heard a low and hoarse voice. It was Hui Yan, using a voice that only he could hear, saying, "Follow him and watch carefully. Don't let your father leave." Huiying subconsciously agreed. Then Huiying let go of his hand, turned around, and walked back to his stone house. The dark shadows swallowed his figure in the house, making people unable to see this old man for a moment. The surrounding barbarians of the Black Fire tribe also began to slowly disperse. An internal strife that could have been a huge upheaval was resolved just like that. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Hence, no one paid any more attention to the fire hawks. Huiying lowered his head, and while no one was paying attention, he began to walk towards the entrance of the tribe's camp. At the same time, he suddenly thought of what his grandfather had just said. It was somewhat inexplicable, and he must have said something wrong. That human was very suspicious. Of course, he couldn't let him go so easily. According to Huiying's idea, it would be best to kill him directly. But how could his father, Hui Yan, leave? He was connected to the Black Fire tribe by blood. Leaving so easily was impossible. The young Huaying laughed to himself. Although he was still a little uneasy, he still quickly walked towards the entrance. From afar, he saw 3 figures standing outside the tribe. 2 people and a wolf. The unusually tall black wolf suddenly turned around to look at him. Then, as if it was mocking him, it bared its teeth at Huaying, revealing 2 snow-white fangs that were as sharp as blades. It seemed that in the next moment, it would stab into Huaying's heart and bite off his neck. Chapter 296. The sky had unknowingly darkened, and the day was about to pass. The 2 people standing outside the Black Fire tribe, Huayan and Lu Chen, looked completely out of place. Their postures and expressions were completely different from each other. One of them was a ferocious, tall, and ferocious-looking barbarian, while the other was a calm, reserved, and composed human. Even Atsu, the huge black wolf demonic beast that was squatting beside Lu Chen, seemed to be more compatible with the barbarian Huayan than with the human, Lu Chen. The 2 looked at each other for a while, and neither spoke. Finally, it was Lu Chen who sighed and said, "Do you have any plans now?" Huayan's face no longer showed the anger from before, and he looked much calmer. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "I still believe that you are a priest sent by the fire god to save our Black Fire tribe." Lu Chen shrugged his shoulders and said, "Looks like your tribe doesn't believe me." Huayan said expressionlessly, "One day, they will believe me." As he said this, he frowned and said, "I remember you once said that when the old priest gave you the fire god's staff, he told you to bring this divine weapon back to the wilderness and deliver it to the fire god altar." Lu Chen wanted to say something, but stopped. A hint of vigilance flashed across his eyes and he said, "What do you mean?" Huayan said, "The people in the tribe can't accept your identity for the time being. Even my father is the same. So, I can't let you become the priest of our Black Fire tribe right now. But this is also good. We can take this opportunity to go to the fire god altar together. Since the fire god has already passed down a divine decree for you to go there, there must be a deeper meaning." Lu Chen was startled and said, "Together?" Huayan nodded and said, "That's right. This is your first time here, so you don't understand the situation. This fire god altar is actually a secret holy land passed down by our Black Fire tribe since ancient times. It is said that in ancient times, when the fire god descended to the world, he appeared there. Now, in order to prevent the sacred place from being spied on by outsiders, the location of the fire god altar has been strictly protected by our tribe. Only the patriarch's bloodline has been passed down from generation to generation. Now in this world, only Father and I know of that place." He took a deep breath and said, "So, if I don't bring you there, you might never find that place." Lu Chen was silent. A moment later, he suddenly smiled. After that, he looked at Huayan and said, "You've probably forgotten what I told you, right?" Huayan said, "What?" "I'm not the emissary of your fire god. I've never felt or heard of any god's decree. It was an accident that I got the fire god's staff. I've never thought of becoming a priest of your Black Fire tribe. Even my coming to the southern wilderness was also an inexplicable accident." Huayan suddenly interrupted Lu Chen and said resolutely and decisively, "Have you ever thought that perhaps this is the will of the fire god that allowed you to come to our Black Fire tribe?" Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. Looking at Huayan's unswerving and resolute expression, a feeling of helplessness welled up in his heart. At this point, he already understood that it was probably impossible to convince this seemingly powerful and persistent barbarian. Perhaps to him, since birth, he had always believed in the fire god and would never waver in the slightest. Therefore, Lu Chen decisively changed his angle and directly said to Huayan, "All right, I won't talk nonsense with you anymore. Right now, I don't want to be the priest." "What are you going to do, kill me?" Huayan's breathing became slightly heavier and an ominous glint flashed in the depths of his eyes. But very quickly, he restrained himself and said in a deep voice, "Can you tell me the reason?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "Do I still need to say it? Wasn't it obvious enough at the tribe just now? Just like how your father and the others look at me. You are barbarians and I am a human. When we meet, we will fight to the death. No one will believe the other. I believe you. Hui Yan said, the fire god sent you here. No matter who you are, I will definitely believe you. Lu Chen paused and shook his head. It's useless even if you believe me. You're not the only person in the Black Fire tribe. Hui Yan said, I can let them slowly accept you. Lu Chen said, alright, even if you're really so powerful that you can change everyone's mind, you can't change my own mind. I am a human and I don't really know your witchcraft. So, it's impossible for me to become the Black Fire tribe's priest. What's so bad about being our priest? Hui Yan looked a little agitated. As long as you really do it, even if you are a human, our Black Fire tribe, starting from me, will definitely revere and respect you. We will not dare to slight you. And in this vast wilderness, besides our tribe, all the other barbarians will want to kill you the moment they see you. Only we can protect you. If I become a priest, maybe I will die faster. What? Hui Yan was suddenly startled. Lu Chen looked at him meaningfully and said, the tribe's priest position is so important and noble. How can you be sure that everyone will obey a human like me? Not to mention other things, your father and that son of yours are arrogant and unruly. Will they obey me? Hui Yan immediately fell silent. Lu Chen continued, besides that, if I sit in this position, I will be the target of everyone. Without power, the tribesmen will not obey me. With power, the other tribes will see me as a thorn in their side. There will definitely be wars and assassinations. When that time comes, I won't even be able to sleep peacefully. Why should I live such a life? The corner of Hui Yan's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something but stopped. Looking at Lu Chen's bright eyes, he sighed after a long while and said, since ancient times, it has been said that you humans are the most treacherous and cunning. Today, it seems that you really live up to your reputation. Nonsense. Lu Chen bluntly retorted, I just don't want to die. You look like a straightforward person on the outside, but on the inside, you are really cunning. Hui Yan snorted and didn't argue with Lu Chen. After thinking for a while, he suddenly said, then is there any way that you can help our Black Fire tribe? No. Lu Chen didn't show any politeness towards this barbarian and directly rejected him. But very quickly, Hui Yan suddenly smiled. That smile seemed a little mysterious, and on his fierce face, it seemed slightly out of place. He lowered his voice and took a step forward, getting closer to Lu Chen. In a low voice, he said, then what if I say that I might have a way for you to return to the north? What? For thousands of years, the separation of the north and south had long been a matter deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Not to mention the southern barbarians, even the flourishing and powerful human cultivators in the north were helpless against the incomparably dangerous disorienting lands. If there really was a passage in the disorienting lands that connected the north and south, the human cultivator army would have long ago attacked. To Lu Chen, Hui Yan's words were so fake that he wanted to laugh. But when he saw the serious expression on Hui Yan's face, he couldn't help but swallow the words that were on the tip of his tongue. After a moment of silence, he said, are you joking? No. Hui Yan said. Do you know of a secret passage that can allow me to return to the north? Yes. I don't believe you. Lu Chen suddenly sneered. The enmity between our two races is as deep as the sea. If there really was such a passage, the barbarians would have long since killed their way there. Hui Yan shook his head. That passage is incomparably dangerous. Ordinary people can't pass through it. If a large army were to head there, it would only result in complete annihilation. On the contrary, if it was a single person, perhaps there would be a chance. Lu Chen sneered. Do you think I will believe your ridiculous words? Hui Yan stared at him and suddenly took a step forward. This time, he whispered in Lu Chen's ear in the lowest voice possible. At first, Lu Chen's expression was still somewhat cold. But very quickly, he revealed a look of astonishment. Then, his eyebrows furrowed and he fell into deep thought. Even after Hui Yan finished speaking and took a few steps back, Lu Chen was still in deep thought for a while. After a while, he looked up at Hui Yan and asked, "Is this true?" Hui Yan's expression was indifferent. He reached into a beast skin bag at his waist and felt around for a while. Then, he threw something over. Lu Chen grabbed it and looked at it carefully. It was half a broken wooden tablet. It was dark brown in color and half the size of a palm. He could vaguely see a picture carved on one side. It was twisted and stretched. It was neither a word nor a seal. For a moment, he couldn't tell what it looked like. However, Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. His gaze was fixed on the wooden tablet. After a long while, he let out a long breath and threw the wooden tablet back to Hui Yan. Hui Yan caught it and stared at Lu Chen. "How is it? Do you recognize this thing?" Lu Chen slowly said, "Consider yourself lucky. There aren't many people in this world who can recognize this thing, but I just happen to be one of them." A light flashed in Hui Yan's eyes. "Then you believe me?" Lu Chen was silent for a long time. Then, he said, "Although what you said is a little absurd, I believe you." Hui Yan quietly clenched his fist and took a step forward. "You're willing to help me?" Lu Chen slowly nodded. "Even if there's only a sliver of hope, I don't want to stay here." "Good," Hui Yan resolutely said. "I swear to you, as long as you can help me and make the Black Fire tribe strong again, I will tell you the secret that can let you return to the north. If I violate this oath, let the fire god punish me and make me die a horrible death." Lu Chen looked at him, but shook his head and said, "No." Hui Yan frowned. "What?" Lu Chen stared at him and said word by word, "I don't want your life. If you want to swear, do it in the name of the entire Black Fire tribe. If you lie to me in the future, then the fire god will betray you and send down divine punishment. The Black Fire tribe will be exterminated from this world." Hui Yan was furious. He growled like a giant beast and grabbed Lu Chen's chest with both hands, almost lifting him up. Beside him, Atsu also jumped up in fright. He bared his sharp fangs at Hui Yan and growled. Hui Yan ignored Atsu and looked at Lu Chen with a pair of bloodthirsty eyes. "You dare to curse the Black Fire tribe?" Lu Chen's face showed no fear. He only said lightly, "What, you don't dare to make this oath?" Chapter 297. Hui Yan's bull-like eyes stared at Lu Chen for a long while, then slowly put him down. His expression also softened. After a while, he suddenly said, "I am only one person, and not even the tribe leader. Even if I make such an oath, it may not necessarily be retribution to the tribe." Lu Chen nodded. "Yes, what you said makes sense." Hui Yan looked at him. "Then you still want me to make an oath?" Lu Chen calmly said, "It doesn't matter whether it counts or not. I just want to be at ease." Hui Yan stared at Lu Chen, and Lu Chen stared back at him. Neither of them had any intention of avoiding each other's eyes. After a while, Hui Yan nodded, took 2 steps to the side, and knelt down on one knee facing the vast wasteland. One hand on his chest, the other pointing to the sky, he repeated the oath that Lu Chen had just said. At this moment, Lu Chen's expression finally changed. When he looked at the barbarian Hui Yan again, his gaze became a little more complicated. There was a bit of caution, but also a bit of admiration. At the same time, the last ray of light in the sky finally disappeared. The sky darkened. "What do you plan to do next?" Lu Chen asked Hui Yan. Hui Yan said, "I will bring you to the fire god altar to see if the fire god has any orders. That place is quite far from here, and it is very well hidden. It is also very dangerous. Without me, you will not be able to find it." Lu Chen glanced at him. "Just the 2 of us?" Hui Yan said, "Just the 2 of us." Lu Chen pointed at the tribe's camp in the darkness. "Are you going to ignore them?" Hui Yan was silent for a while. "With my father here, the tribe will not fall into chaos. In addition, we have just defeated the mountain spirit tribe, so there will not be any sudden wars in this period of time." Before he finished speaking, a figure suddenly rushed out from the darkness. It was Hui Yan's son, Hui Ying. The young man's face was filled with excitement as he ran in front of Hui Yan, shouting, "Father, what are you doing?" The muscles on Hui Yan's face twitched slightly. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Son, I need to leave the tribe for a period of time. During this period of time, you have to help me lead the tribe. Don't be willful." "Why?" The fire hawk looked furious and incomprehensible. He pointed at Lu Chen and said, "Just for this human who suddenly appeared." "Father, what's wrong with you today? Why do you seem like a different person all of a sudden?" Hui Yan shook his head and said, "This is the will of the fire god. Son, everything I do is for our black fire tribe." The fire hawk let out a low roar, but looking at his father's determined expression, he seemed to know that he could no longer persuade him. He could only turn his head and glare fiercely at Lu Chen. If looks could kill, Lu Chen would probably be dead by now. Then, the fire hawk clenched his teeth and ran back with large strides. He seemed extremely disappointed in his father. Lu Chen looked at the back of the young man and suddenly said, "Actually, what he said is somewhat reasonable. Anyone would feel that your decision is somewhat unimaginable." Hui Yan silently looked in the direction that the fire hawk disappeared, as well as the blurry shadow of the black fire tribe's camp in the night. After a while, he suddenly threw the fire god's staff to Lu Chen, then turned and walked into the distance. At the same time, he said, "Let's go." Lu Chen caught the fire god's staff and turned it around in his hand. The smooth feeling made him feel somewhat familiar and intimate. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He casually leaned against his chest and the fire god's staff instantly disappeared. He then called out to Atsu and quickly followed Hui Yan. As they walked, Hui Yan intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Lu Chen's chest. A strange look flashed in his eyes, but in the end, he didn't say anything. After walking like this for a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked him, "There's something I still want to ask you." Hui Yan said, "Speak." Lu Chen said, "The entire Black Fire tribe doesn't believe me. You're just one person. With your status and identity, why would you take such a great risk and do something so reckless that you almost fell out with your tribe?" Hui Yan silently walked forward. After a while, he said in a low voice, "They can't see the danger." "What danger?" "The danger of the tribe's extinction." Lu Chen frowned. "What do you mean?" Hui Yan's face darkened, then he slowly said, "Ever since the ancestors of the tribe escaped from the north 1,000 years ago, bad luck has been haunting our Black Fire tribe. This is because those ancestors committed a great sin and were punished by the fire god." Lu Chen thought for a moment, then looked at him and asked tentatively, "You mean to say, what did the ancestors of the Black Fire tribe do when they escaped from the north?" Hui Yan smiled bitterly, then said bitterly, "Back then, your human cultivator army was too strong. After a bloody battle, the outcome was clear. Back then, the Black Fire tribe was second to none, and was responsible for covering the retreat of the other tribes as they fled south. But at the most critical moment, our ancestors abandoned the shamans, priests, and warriors who were engaged in a fierce battle. They crossed the Great Snow Mountain and the Broken Spirit Sand Sea and ran back to the wilderness." Lu Chen was startled, then seemed to think of something. "Later, your powerful ancestors didn't come back?" Hui Yan sighed and said, "Later on, the war became extremely intense. Your human race had unrivaled masters who fought, causing the mountains to collapse and the earth to crack, the terrain to change. The only path was also sealed. After that, those people were never able to return." Lu Chen was speechless. After a moment of silence, Hui Yan's tone seemed to have calmed down. Soon after, he said, "From then on, our Black Fire tribe suffered a disastrous decline, becoming a small and weak tribe in the wastelands. Until now, we can only mingle with small tribes like the Ghost Iron Thunder Lizard. But even so, after a long time, the people in our tribe gradually got used to it. They felt that there was nothing wrong with continuing like this." Lu Chen said, "But you don't think so?" Hui Yan shook his head. "Living like this, there is no vitality and no hope. Even if we can continue to live for decades or even centuries, there will be a day when an accident, a storm, a defeat in a battle, is enough to make our Black Fire tribe disappear. He stopped and turned to look at Lu Qin. They can't see it, but I saw it. Originally, I was at my wit's end. But I happened to meet you. No matter what, I have to take a gamble. The Black Fire tribe is too weak. Only by having a priest in the tribe can we have hope to rise again in this harsh wilderness. Even if... Lu Qin said lightly, even if that priest is a human? Hui Yan was silent for a moment. His cheeks twitched as if he was gritting his teeth. Then he said in a low voice, yes. Lu Qin nodded. After taking a few steps forward, he suddenly asked, then have you ever thought that maybe the others in the Black Fire tribe are not wrong, and you are the only one in the wrong? Hui Yan strode forward, facing the boundless night. As the cold wind blew past, his tall and burly body showed no intention of retreating. He walked forward proudly and said loudly, then I've lost. That's fine. I'll compensate you with my life. Just think of it as me dying for the Black Fire tribe. Lu Qin looked at his back and suddenly sighed. He nodded and said to himself in a low voice, what a good man. I didn't expect there to be such a resolute person in the barbarian tribe. Amazing. Hui Yan led Lu Qin into the depths of the wilderness for a day and a night. Apart from resting and sleeping in between, he had been walking forward the entire time. Later, Lu Qin couldn't help but feel curious. He asked, isn't the fire god altar the sacred land of the Black Fire tribe? Why didn't you guys guard the sacred land nearby? Hui Yan shook his head. That won't do. Firstly, the sacred land of the fire god altar is different. It's not suitable for ordinary people to live near it. Secondly, living too close would easily attract the attention of other tribes, which would endanger the safety of the sacred land. Lu Qin raised his eyebrows. Other tribes also know about the fire god altar, so they want to spy on you? Hui Yan nodded and said, back then, our tribe was the largest tribe in the wasteland after all. Therefore, many people thought that there might be many treasures in our sacred altar. After the north and south were completely isolated, many people from the tribe tried to coerce and bribe us for this secret, but we rejected all of them. They didn't use any tricks. Of course they did. Hui Yan said indifferently. Kidnapping, murder, interrogation, war. Our Black Fire tribe has experienced it all. Otherwise, our strength wouldn't have declined so quickly. Later on, they used all kinds of methods, but they still didn't get any news. Therefore, this matter gradually faded. They probably thought that the fire god altar was just a legend. Lu Qin wanted to say something but stopped. He felt an inexplicable pressure on his body. Such an important secret had been kept by the Black Fire tribe for so many years. It had only been passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. But now, Hui Yan was bringing him there just like that. Part of this was because of the so-called fire god. Carrying a fire god's staff was too attractive. But Hui Yan, this barbarian's decisiveness, once again made Lu Qin exclaim in his heart. He raised his head to look at Hui Yan. He thought to himself, this barbarian is probably the most gambler and craziest of all the barbarians in all these years. Just like that, they walked for 2 days, but they still hadn't reached the place that Hui Yan had mentioned. However, on the second day, when they were walking on the desolate wasteland, a gust of yellow sand and dust suddenly blew towards them. Then, there was a shrill whistling sound, as if someone was howling towards the sky, and also as if there was a magnificent army floating over from the depths of the wasteland in front of them. Chapter 298. Hui Yan's expression suddenly changed, looking somewhat nervous. He quickly laid down on the ground and stuck his ear to the ground to listen for a while. His expression immediately became ugly. Lu Qin also frowned and asked, "What, is there trouble?" Hui Yan nodded and said, "It could be a pack of wolves." There were packs of wolves in the wasteland, and these wolves were not ordinary wolves. They were all powerful demonic wolves that had advanced to the next rank. They often formed packs of 10 and wreaked havoc in the wasteland. Apart from not daring to attack the tribal camps or the barbarian settlements, there was almost nothing in the wasteland that the demonic wolves did not dare to attack. Wolf packs ate everything they could eat, wild beasts, demonic beasts, and even lone or small numbers of barbarian people. Demonic wolves were extremely powerful, fierce and agile. That was why a few dozen demonic wolves could run with the might of a magnificent army. It was extremely shocking. But Hui Yan's expression was ugly as he looked at the yellow sand in front of him. He anxiously asked with a trace of doubt, shouldn't these wolves live near the plains in the south? Why would they come to the desert? Although a few dozen ferocious and powerful demon wolves gathered together had terrifying battle strength, they also needed a lot of food every day. Therefore, in this extremely barren and desolate area near the northern border, it was actually impossible to raise too many demon wolves. Most of the wolf pack's activity area was further south. In the past, Hui Yan had walked along this route to the fire god altar, but he had never met a wolf pack, except this time. Damn! What is going on? Hui Yan cursed angrily. Lu Chen was still relatively calm. He said to him, if this wolf pack is really so strong, why don't we first run a distance and avoid them? Hui Yan smiled bitterly and shook his head. His gaze was looking around, as if he was looking for something. At the same time, he said, it's useless. The wolf pack's sense of smell is extremely sharp. As long as we are targeted by them, we cannot escape unless there is a large river nearby. Other than yellow sand, there was only dry sand nearby. Of course, there would not be a large river like the Dragon River. Lu Chen thought for a while and said to Hui Yan, I think we can run. Hui Yan was startled and turned to look at him. Lu Chen patted Atsu's back and said very calmly, this black wolf of mine is especially good at escaping. Whether it's speed or endurance, it's definitely better than those demonic beasts, so I should be able to escape if I want to. But as for you... He paused for a moment, sizing up Hui Yan, and then said with sincerity, you are so tall and burly, and your footsteps are so loud, I don't need to ask to know how heavy you are. I can't bring you along to escape, or else we will die together. Hui Yan was speechless. He looked at Lu Chen, and after a while, he said, have you always been this straightforward with your words? Not really. I only do this when I'm in a life and death situation. Alright, the two of them stood side by side, looking at the vast wasteland and the yellow sand that was being kicked up, listening to the soul-stirring sound that was getting closer and closer. Then, they looked at each other. Hui Yan frowned and said, why aren't you running? Lu Chen said, I feel that Atsu can bring me along and escape, but seeing how calm you are, I really want to see just how you will escape. Hui Yan was silent for a moment, and said, I have no choice. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, oh, so you are waiting for death here? Hui Yan sighed, but there was no fear on his face. Instead, a trace of helplessness appeared on his face as he said, this is the will of the heavens, there is nothing I can do. Lu Chen clicked his tongue twice, and said while shaking his head, looking at you before, you have a great breadth of mind and spirit. You should be a rare heroic figure in the brute tribe. Logically speaking, this kind of matter shouldn't be too difficult for you. Hui Yan snorted and said, thank you for thinking so highly of me, but it's a pity that I have ambition, but the fire god doesn't take pity on me. I am fated to die here. Heart higher than the sky, life thinner than paper. Lu Chen couldn't help but think of an old saying passed down from the human race. Although it was a little strange to use it on this fierce brute, the meaning was more or less the same. He shook his head and sighed, then looked at the yellow sand that was getting closer and closer. The mournful howl seemed to be right next to his ears. Is there really no other way? Lu Chen asked. Yes. Hui Yan responded, and said, looks like it's about time, you should go. I am a black fire warrior after all, I have to fight before I die. As he said that, he slowly pulled out the giant axe that he was wearing. Even if you give up, in the future when I return to the north, my only hope is still on you. Lu Chen said, since you are going to die anyway, why don't you tell me that secret before you die? Hui Yan shook his head and said, no. Lu Chen spread out his hands and said, "Why is that? Do you want to keep this matter to yourself even if you have to die?" Hui Yan said seriously, "That day, I solemnly swore to the fire god that if you can't help the Black Fire tribe rise to power, I can't tell you." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, "Then I promise you, as long as you tell me, I will definitely do it, okay?" Still no. Damn. Lu Chen couldn't help but curse, and said, "Why is that?" Hui Yan said, "After I die, the Black Fire tribe will never accept you. Even if they are exterminated, they will not let you become the tribe's priest. So, your promise is meaningless, it's just a bunch of nonsense." Lu Chen glared at this barbarian who was about to die but still had a surprisingly good brain. His face was full of anger. A faint smile appeared on Hui Yan's originally ferocious face, and he even appeared somewhat relaxed. He even extended his hand and gently patted Lu Chen's shoulder. After which, he said, "Although I do not wish to die in this place for no reason, it is actually very interesting to think that I am able to get to know a human like you before I die. It's a pity that I will not be able to accomplish such great things with you in the future." Ha ha ha, as he laughed, the fierce and mighty berserker looked as if he had already seen through life and death. Not only did he not run away with the great axe in his hand, he started to walk forward instead. After a while, Lu Chen's somewhat annoyed voice suddenly came from behind him. There was even a faint trace of frustration in his voice as he complained, "I didn't think that I wouldn't suffer a loss in front of that damn Baldy, but today I actually suffered in front of a barbarian fool like you." Hui Yan's footsteps paused for a moment. He probably didn't understand what it meant to lose in front of a barbarian. But very quickly, he heard Lu Chen say, "Hey, come back, I have a way to save you." Hui Yan's eyes lit up. With a "hoo" sound, he put away his great axe and jumped back. He anxiously asked Lu Chen, "What way?" The big man suddenly rushed over with an imposing aura, causing Lu Chen to jump in fright. He couldn't help but say, "I say, didn't you look as if you had seen through life and death just now?" Hui Yan spat and said, "Only an idiot would want to die. Didn't I have no other way?" As he spoke, he grinned and stared at Lu Chen as he said, quickly tell me how to save me." Afterwards, he glanced at Atsu and said to himself, "Could it be that your accompanying demonic beast is really gifted? It can actually carry the two of us and escape." "Of course not." Lu Chen sneered, then said seriously, "This is an absolute secret of mine. I can't easily reveal it to others. If it wasn't for you being so tight-lipped, and that this secret can only be known from you, I definitely wouldn't let you know. How about this, make another vow that you will never reveal this secret of mine, even to those closest to you." Hui Yan looked at him deeply and nodded. Then, just like before, he solemnly swore an oath to the fire god. Even the retribution of the oath was the same as before. Smoke and dust soared into the sky. The endless yellow sand was already rushing towards them, and the stench of blood was already faintly discernible. Lu Chen said, "You are really decisive. You said you would make an oath, and you did it without the slightest bit of hesitation." Hui Yan pointed at the yellow sand that was already in front of them and said, "Escaping is more important. If we don't do it quickly, we have no choice." Ho! A long howl came from the yellow sand, and a huge black shadow faintly appeared. It looked like a giant wolf. Its entire body was black and gray, and it was about the same size as the Atsu. The only difference was that the Atsu's fur was pure black, and not messy like the other wolf demons. Lu Chen snorted and called for the Atsu to come closer. Then, he stretched out his hand and pulled Hui Yan. In just a few moments, there were already no less than 10 giant wolves in the rolling yellow sand. They all roared fiercely and rushed over, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. It was a terrifying sight. At the same time, a white light suddenly lit up. After a flash in the yellow sand, the two figures and the Atsu's body suddenly disappeared at the same time. All of the giant wolves pounced on empty air, and a few of them even fiercely collided with each other. For a moment, the sound of crashing could be heard. The pack of wolves angrily roared, and their sharp fangs frantically searched the surroundings. But everything disappeared as if it was an illusion, as if the two people and one wolf had never existed. Only in an inconspicuous corner of the yellow sand, on the ground, a small seed was covered by the rolling dust, rolling about in the terrifying claws of the pack of wolves, and then buried even deeper into the sand, never to be seen again. Needless to say, Lu Chen, Hui Yan, and the Atsu all hid in the mysterious ancient tree hole. After the white light flashed in the silent tree hole, their bodies suddenly fell to the ground. Then, Hui Yan was the first to jump up, holding the giant axe in his hand tightly. His eyes revealed a trace of vigilance as he looked around. "Don't worry, there's no danger here." Lu Chen's somewhat unhappy voice came from behind him. Different from Hui Yan, Lu Chen and the Atsu had already adapted to the situation here. At this moment, they were lazily sitting up. Hui Yan looked around again, and after confirming that there was nothing dangerous, he let out a sigh of relief. He grinned and looked towards Lu Chen. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, his expression abruptly changed. Before he could even utter a single word, his eyes suddenly rolled back into his head, and he actually directly fell to the ground. With a bang, he seemed to have fallen unconscious. Chapter 299. Lu Chen and Atsu, who were about to stand up in a relaxed manner, suddenly froze at the same time. They watched in shock as Hui Yan's huge body crashed down like a collapsing mountain, heavily smashing into the ground with a dull thud. This sound was painful to listen to. If there were any more crisp cracking sounds, Lu Chen would have thought that Hui Yan had probably broken his own bones. The man and dog were stunned on the ground for a moment, then they looked at each other. Atsu also seemed to be very confused. He looked at Hui Yan, then looked at Lu Chen, then suddenly jumped up, his tail wagging wildly, and barked a few times at Lu Chen, actually revealing a look of flattery. Lu Chen spat and pushed away the big dog head that had come up to him. He angrily scolded, "Are you stupid? How could it be me?" After saying that, he hurriedly went forward to check on Hui Yan's condition. Atsu seemed to have let bygones be bygones, and seemed to be in a good mood. He followed beside Lu Chen, sticking his head out to look at Hui Yan. From time to time, he would use his nose to sniff the barbarian's body a few times. After a brief inspection, Lu Chen discovered that there were no bleeding wounds on Hui Yan's body. Of course, there were no signs of any broken bones. It seemed that everything was fine. But this barbarian warrior, who was as strong as a bull, was currently inexplicably unconscious. At the same time, his chest was heaving up and down rapidly, his breathing was also rapid. His eyes had turned white, and his cheeks were swollen red. He looked like a fish that had been thrown onto the shore, or a monster that had strangled his throat and made him unable to breathe. He looked like he was in extreme pain. Lu Chen was also momentarily stunned and at a loss for what to do. He and Atsu had entered this place without any problems, but only Hui Yan had encountered such a strange thing. Even if he wanted to save him, he didn't know where to start. Lu Chen furrowed his brows and tried to get Hui Yan to lie flat, or help him turn over. However, these simple movements were obviously of no help to this barbarian who had suddenly fallen into a painful coma. Hui Yan was still unconscious, and as time passed, his appearance became worse and worse. His cheeks were getting redder and redder, and his breathing was getting weaker. At the same time, his eyes were showing signs of bulging out. Upon seeing Hui Yan's current state, Lu Chen could not help but feel his scalp turn numb. If this strange state continued, he subconsciously felt that something extremely terrifying and horrifying would most likely happen to this barbarian. But how was she going to save him? Immediately pulling Hui Yan away from this mysterious tree hole was naturally the simplest and fastest method. However, the outside of the tree hole was likely surrounded by a large pack of incomparably ferocious demonic wolves. They were fuming with rage, and were furiously roaring as they dug 3 feet into the ground in order to find their missing prey. Once they left, only death would await them. Moreover, if he wanted Hui Yan to leave this place, Lu Chen himself would have to leave as well. In other words, Lu Chen would have to risk his life to help Hui Yan leave this place. Although Lu Chen felt that this barbarian Hui Yan was quite pleasing to the eye, he could forget about paying such a huge price. However, other than this cave was only so big. Other than the few things that he had thrown here, there was nothing else. In fact, Lu Chen did not even know what had caused Hui Yan to suddenly become like this, let alone find a way to save him. He stood up, and glanced at his surroundings in annoyance. Everywhere was the same. The ground, the tree walls, the hazy green qi, and at most, the two doorways that were faintly discernible embedded in the tree walls. Everything was the same as usual, but just what was it that caused Hui Yan to become so unaccustomed to this place the moment he entered? The only exit could not be exited, and there were similarly no other paths to take in this tree hole. Hui Yan's situation was getting worse and worse. In the blink of an eye, his cheeks were so red that it seemed as if blood was about to drip out. The bulges in his eyes grew larger and larger, as if something was about to explode in his body. It was truly a terrifying sight. In this anxious moment, Lu Chen recalled that before Hui Yan had entered this ancient tree hole, other than himself and Atsu, there was actually another person who had come here. White Lotus. Thinking of this, Lu Chen suddenly fell into deep thought. That day when White Lotus had entered here, she seemed to have encountered an accident. When she had entered, she had also fallen unconscious. However, what was different from Hui Yan was that she did not experience any difficulty in breathing, nor did her eyeballs bulge out of her body. Lu Chen was even more at a loss for a moment. Looking at the surroundings of the tree hole again, he felt that this tree hole that was originally very familiar to him had suddenly become a little strange. It was a little more sinister and scary, but he just couldn't tell what was strange about it. Why was he the only one who had entered without any problems? What was the problem? Lu Chen forcefully shook his head, throwing away the messy and distracting thoughts in his mind. At this moment, the most important thing was to think of a way to save Hui Yan's life. Otherwise, if this barbarian died, his only hope of returning to the north would most likely be lost. But, how was he going to save him? There was no way to leave, and there were no elixirs. Looking at Hui Yan's current situation, it was obvious that the blood and qi in his body were under some kind of pressure. It was stimulated to the extreme and looked like it was about to explode. His expression was already extremely ugly, and two thin streaks of blood had already flowed down from his bulging eye sockets. Lu Chen did not doubt that if he still did not think of a way, this barbarian would very likely explode in front of him in a short while. That scene, just thinking about it was extremely frightening. Lu Chen's forehead was also dripping with cold sweat. However, the situation in front of him seemed to be a dead end. There was no way out at all. Just as he was feeling extremely anxious, he saw that the black dog beside him did not seem to be interested in this tense atmosphere. At first, it would still curiously sniff Hui Yan, but very quickly, it walked away. At this time, it walked to the puddle in the tree hole, lying there and looking into the water. It seemed that the water there was much more interesting than this. Water. All of a sudden, Lu Chen's body trembled violently. Everything in this huge ancient tree hole was exactly the same. The only thing that was different was the puddle in the middle of the tree hole. This thought flashed through Lu Chen's mind like a spark. He suddenly looked back and saw that Hui Yan's situation had reached the most critical point, and he was in danger of exploding at any time. At this time, he could not care so much. With a light shout, he directly grabbed Hui Yan's body and dragged him forward, all the way to the puddle. Atsu, who was originally lying on the edge of the water and looking at its own reflection, jumped up in shock. Before it could even react, it heard a whoosh and a black shadow flashed past in front of it. A moment later, Hui Yan's huge body was directly thrown into the puddle by Lu Chen. Dong! With a loud bang, water splashed all over the place, splashing all over Atsu, who was caught off guard, and splashed all over his body. Atsu screamed and took 2 steps back. Then, it bared its teeth and barked at Hui Yan in the puddle, looking very angry. As for Lu Chen, he had jumped away in advance and was not splashed much by the water. However, he was more concerned about Hui Yan's situation. After the water splashed, he quickly leaned forward again, wanting to see if this barbarian would be better in the water. Actually, Lu Chen did not have much confidence in his own ability. Right now, it was just a desperate attempt. If this method did not work, then Hui Yan could only blame himself for being unlucky. The water in the puddle trembled violently, swaying non-stop. Hui Yan's body was bobbing up and down in the water, but there were no signs of him waking up. Lu Chen's heart sank slightly. Could it be that the heavens want you dead? Atsu, who was at the side, came over curiously. It leaned against Lu Chen's side and looked. Seeing that Hui Yan did not move for a long time, it snorted and began to shake its body to get rid of the water droplets on its body. For a moment, the sound of water splashing could be heard, and the water droplets splashed everywhere, splashing all over Lu Chen's body. Lu Chen cursed and pushed the stupid dog away. At this moment, he did not have the mood to argue with it. He was still carefully watching Hui Yan in the water. After a while, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he let out a sound of surprise. He saw that Hui Yan's entire body was submerged in the water. Although he was still unconscious, he did not know why, but the red color on his face was slowly receding. His pair of scary bulging eyes were also slowly calming down, gradually returning to normal. This puddle was actually effective. For a moment, Lu Chen did not know what to say. After a while, he laughed and let out a long breath. He then stood up and said indifferently, "Consider yourself lucky." Without a doubt, this puddle was the most miraculous thing in this mysterious ancient tree hole. In the past, when Lu Chen was tormented by the evil curse of burning his body and soul, he had also hidden in this place to struggle at death's door. After 10 years, he had finally broken free from the frightening black flame curse, but at the same time, he had used up all the life essence in this puddle. Today, the water in this puddle was no different from an ordinary puddle. But today, it seemed to have saved Hui Yan's life. Even though Lu Chen did not understand the reason behind this. He waited for a while by the side of the puddle. After seeing that Hui Yan's condition had mostly returned to normal, he picked up Hui Yan's head and placed it at the side, slightly away from the water. This was to prevent Hui Yan from suffocating to death if he stayed underwater for a long time. During this time, he was extremely careful, afraid that something would happen if Hui Yan showed his head. If that was the case, then he really could not do anything. But fortunately, it seemed that Hui Yan, whose body was mostly submerged in the water, was no longer in that strange situation and had returned to normal. However, just like White Lotus, he was still unconscious. After placing Hui Yan down, Lu Chen walked to the side and sat down next to Atsu. Atsu raised its head and looked at him. Lu Chen also smiled at it. Then, he frowned slightly and said to Atsu in a soft voice, "Atsu, do you also feel that it's strange? Why is it like this? What is it that the two of us have that they don't?" Chapter 300. The food that was originally stored in this mysterious tree hole had been depleted when they fell into the Longchuan. After they came out, they were already in the southern wilderness. These days, because the places they passed by were very barren, Lu Chen did not replenish anything. As a result, Lu Chen and Atsu could not stay here for too long. Fortunately, the wolves would not understand the reason for their sudden disappearance, so they would not stay around the seed for too long. But no matter what, it was better to wait a little longer. It would probably be safer. Lu Chen thought to himself. For the past 10 years, he had tried his best to hide the secret of this seed and there had not been any accidents. But after he got close to the chaotic lands, especially during this period of time, things happened one after another. The last time he fell into the Longchuan, this time he was forced by the wolves. He was almost in a state where he could not control the dangers of the outside world. This was a very disgusting feeling for Lu Chen. He thought to himself that he should avoid this kind of thing as much as possible in the future. Waiting was a dull and boring thing, especially in this mysterious tree hole that was not too big. There was nowhere to go and nowhere to look. It was very stressful. If an ordinary person came here, they would probably feel the passage of time become blurred. But Lu Chen had already gotten used to the atmosphere here after so many years, so he did not feel anything strange. As for Atsu, even though this dog had advanced to become a holy beast, it still looked as carefree as before. As long as there was food to eat, it would not care about anything. In any case, it just ate and slept, and ate again when it woke up. Occasionally, it would play with Lu Chen. But the terrible thing was that there was no food here. So, although Atsu seemed to be in a normal mood, no one knew what would happen when it was hungry. When Lu Chen thought of this, he could not help but look suspiciously at the black dog lying beside him. He muttered, "You stupid dog, when you're really hungry, you won't go crazy and eat me, will you?" It was unknown whether Atsu heard Lu Chen's words clearly. It lay on the ground and yawned loudly, looking a little sleepy. Lu Chen glared at it, then casually picked up the Vulcan staff that had been thrown to the side. Although he had not activated the spiritual power of the black flames and the Vulcan staff did not shine, the strange and twisted totem runes on the staff could still be clearly seen. It should represent another power that was completely different from the human cultivation world of the divine central continent. Many years ago, this power had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the human race, and to this day, most human cultivators despised the barbarians. But Lu Chen had personally experienced the power of the black flames, and was also one of the few people who had seen the power of the southern border barbarians. From the bottom of his heart, he was actually in awe of this power. He stroked the fire god's staff and pondered silently. At a certain moment, he suddenly thought of the fire shaman he met 10 years ago. That old shaman had given him 10 years of painful experiences that were worse than death. Until death, it was difficult for Lu Chen to forget him. But there was no doubt that the fire shaman was unusually powerful. But why did he not bring the Vulcan staff with him in the Battle of the Barren Valley? Wasn't the Vulcan staff the artifact of the Black Fire tribe? Why did the fire shaman not bring such an important thing at such an important moment? Instead, more than 10 years after his death, Lu Chen accidentally found this thing in a small tribe that had already been weakened to the extreme. Was it because the fire shaman was too confident in his power and did not bring it with him? Or was it because the Vulcan staff was too important and did not want to take the risk of bringing it out of the tribe? Or did he simply feel that it was not safe for him to lead the elites away from the tribe, so he left the artifact behind to protect the tribe? Lu Chen pondered for a long time, his gaze sweeping over the unconscious Hui Yen who was soaking in the water. He felt that there were too many mysteries surrounding the past events of the disorienting lands. The Black Fire barbarian tribe also seemed to be unfathomable, and he did not know what their relationship was with the fire god that he did not know was real or fake. If it was really as Hui Yen said, that the entire Black Fire tribe worshipped the fire god, then with the identity, status and power of the fire shaman, why did he abandon the fire god and instead join forces with the demon cult of the human race? All these things were like scattered pearls, but on his way to the southern wilderness this time, he seemed to vaguely feel that there was an invisible thread slowly linking everything together. The truth hidden behind the layer of fog seemed to be vaguely revealed. Lu Chen waited for a long time until Atsu began to faintly become restless and looked around for food. Only then did he stand up. There was no change in Hui Yen who was soaking in the water, and he still looked unconscious. Lu Chen walked over to check his breathing, and then checked his physical condition. Indeed, there was no change. "Let's go, we're going out." Lu Chen turned and called Atsu over. He then shrugged and said, "I hope our luck isn't too bad." Boom. A light flashed, and 3 figures appeared out of thin air, then fell to the ground. After the initial wave of dizziness, Lu Chen quickly recovered and then turned over and jumped up. But he only felt the surrounding sand and soil swarming over him. In the chaos, he couldn't see his surroundings clearly. Lu Chen was still shocked. He thought to himself, did this seed fall into some kind of underground sand pit? Fortunately, after a while, the surrounding sand and soil stopped falling. Even so, 2 people and a dog were still covered in dust, looking particularly embarrassed. When the smoke and dust gradually settled, Lu Chen discovered that the 3 of them were knee-deep in a sand pit. There was no trace of the terrifying wolf pack in the surroundings. Lu Chen breathed a sigh of relief. He looked around and found that the place was somewhat familiar. It seemed to be the place where the wolf pack had caught up to them. It seemed that during this period of time, no one had discovered the secret of this seed, so no one noticed it when it fell to the ground. He hurriedly pulled Hui Yen up. Now that they were out of the tree hole, Hui Yen seemed to have returned to normal. There was no longer any protruding eyes or boiling blood. After about the time to drink a cup of tea, Hui Yen suddenly let out a long low groan, and then slowly woke up. Lu Chen stood to the side and looked at him. He saw that Hui Yan's expression was somewhat dazed, as if he hadn't completely woken up. After a while, Hui Yan turned his head and looked at Lu Chen. His eyes went from scattered to focused, and after staring at him for a while, Hui Yan suddenly opened his mouth and said with some surprise, "Where are we now?" "Still in the same place." Lu Chen said, "But don't worry, the wolf pack has already left." Hui Yan nodded, and his expression seemed to have relaxed a little. It was obvious that he, as a barbarian, was much more afraid of the wolf pack than Lu Chen. He stood up and patted the dust off his body. He let out a long sigh, and there was some joy on his face. No matter what, being able to escape was always a good thing. After tidying up, Lu Chen felt his trousers being dragged a few times. He looked down and saw that it was Atsu coming over and biting him. He couldn't help but laugh and nodded, "Got it, we'll go find something to eat." Atsu was instantly happy. Hui Yan, who was at the side, was startled. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "How long have we been here?" Lu Chen thought for a while and said, "I'm not sure, but it should be a long time." Hui Yan nodded, and looked up to identify the direction. He then pointed in a direction and said to Lu Chen, "Let's go that way." Lu Chen agreed and followed with Atsu. After walking for a while, he heard Hui Yan suddenly say, "Lu Chen, don't you have anything to say to me?" Lu Chen said, "What do you want to hear?" Hui Yan hesitated for a while and said, "That strange place. It seems to be a cave." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, "What, you don't remember?" Hui Yan said with some distress, "I only remember that I seem to have followed you into a cave. I don't remember anything else. Also, my whole body felt uncomfortable very quickly and I fainted. When I woke up again, it was already now." Lu Chen smiled and said, "That's for the best. Actually, that's not important. You just need to remember that I did save your life." Hui Yan nodded silently. After walking for a while, he suddenly asked, "Was that a divine weapon given to you by the fire god, or some kind of ability?" "That has nothing to do with your fire god." Lu Chen replied resolutely. "Oh." Hui Yan sighed and looked a little disappointed. Lu Chen snorted and turned his head. His face was expressionless, but deep in his heart, he suddenly became silent. After a while, he thought to himself, whether this seed has anything to do with the fire god or not, it probably has a deep relationship with the Black Fire tribe. Chapter 301. Since Hui Yan had already recovered, he seemed to be fine. It was as if his experience in the mysterious tree hole was really just a dream. However, on the following journey, Hui Yan seemed to have other thoughts. He would often furrow his brows, as if he was thinking about something. From time to time, he would glance at Lu Chen, looking a little hesitant. Lu Chen noticed Hui Yan's expression and became a little more cautious in his heart. No matter what, he and Hui Yan were ultimately two people from different races. Even though Hui Yan had once sworn a heavy oath, Lu Chen did not completely believe him. The ancient tree hole brought about by the mysterious seed was truly too miraculous. Anyone in the world who saw it would inevitably covet it. Not to mention that this thing was actually inextricably linked to the Black Fire tribe. If Hui Yan had some thoughts about it, it wouldn't be strange. However, as long as Hui Yan did not say anything, Lu Chen could only pretend that he did not see it. Otherwise, if he really went to question him, there was a possibility that they would immediately shed all pretense of cordiality. Lu Chen pretended to be deaf and mute, but it did not mean that Hui Yan would do the same. So, after the two of them walked in silence for a while, Hui Yan suddenly turned to face Lu Chen. As if he had made up his mind, he said, Lu Chen, wait a moment, I have something to say to you. Lu Chen sighed in his heart, nodded and stood still. However, at the same time, he waved his hand at a place behind him where Hui Yan could not see. Atsu, who was standing behind him, saw it and slowly walked to Lu Chen's side. On the previous journey, Lu Chen and Hui Yan had thought of a way to kill a monster that lived in the wilderness. The two of them and Atsu shared the food. Counting it, Atsu ate more than the two of them combined. It could be considered to be in a state of satiation. However, it was obvious that the kindness of a meal was not enough to shake the friendship between Atsu and Lu Chen. Therefore, Atsu did not hesitate to stand on Lu Chen's side. It growled softly and slowly revealed its snow-white fangs. Hui Yan did not seem to notice that Atsu was acting strangely. He still looked at Lu Chen. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Lu Chen, I have something here. Since I have already recognized you as the priest of our Black Fire tribe, I should give it to you. As he spoke, he took out a piece of animal skin and handed it to Lu Chen. Lu Chen was startled for a moment. It was somewhat unexpected, but he quickly calmed down. He nodded and took the animal skin. At the same time, he quietly kicked Atsu. Atsu, who was baring its fangs in a ferocious manner, suddenly froze. It looked innocently at Lu Chen and let out a grunt. It simply lay down on the ground at the side and lazily ignored these complicated and changeable humans. Lu Chen naturally did not care about it. He took the animal skin in his hand and looked at it. It felt a little rough to the touch and was very thick. At the same time, the color of the fur was very dark. For a moment, he could not tell what kind of animal fur it was. He could not help but ask curiously, what is this? Hui Yan sighed, his face looked a little bitter. He said, this is a witchcraft scroll that has been passed down from generation to generation in our Black Fire tribe. Recorded on it are a few witchcraft spells that only our Black Fire tribe shamans or priests can use. Here, he paused and seemed to hesitate for a moment. He then said, this thing has been damaged before. Right now, it can only be considered a remnant scroll. Lu Chen was shocked. After a moment of hesitation, he did not immediately open the animal skin. Instead, he stared at Hui Yan and said, I have not been to the fire god altar, nor have I truly obtained the recognition of your fire god. To your tribe, this scroll must be an exceptionally precious treasure. You are so assured to give it to me? Hui Yan was silent for a moment. He said, it is true that before, I was still somewhat wary of you. That is why I hid this scroll and did not give it to you. But after encountering the wolf pack, I understood. In this vast southern wilderness, strength was the most important thing. No matter if it was a large or small tribe, or a lone barbarian warrior, it was the same. Those with weak strength would eventually be destroyed by others. In this harsh wilderness, it would be difficult for them to survive. The priest was one of the most powerful people in a tribe. Because Hui Yan had previously concealed this secret, when the wolf pack suddenly appeared, if it wasn't for Lu Chen's mysterious and strange tree hole to hide in, there would most likely be no bones left. As for other distracting thoughts, as long as he believed that it was the will of the fire god, there was probably no need to be serious about it. These were the things that Hui Yan was thinking about right now. But, I am a human, and I have not been recognized by the fire god. Is this really okay? Lu Chen asked again. Hui Yan shook his head and said, if I had given this to you before, perhaps you would have learned a little of the witchcraft recorded on it. When we faced the wolf pack, we would not be so helpless. Lu Chen was startled for a moment. Then he waved the leather scroll in his hand and said with some disbelief, the witchcraft recorded on it is so powerful. Hui Yan thought for a moment, but he didn't seem too sure. He said, our tribe hasn't had a priest for a very long time, so we don't know how powerful this witchcraft is. However, the stories passed down in the tribe are all praising the glory and strength of our ancestors in the past, so this witchcraft must be very powerful. Lu Chen was half convinced and half doubtful. After hesitating for a moment, he couldn't help but be curious and said, then I'll read it? Hui Yan nodded and said, "You can learn it. As long as you can learn the witchcraft recorded on it, I think, our tribe may really have hope of reviving." "You think really far ahead." Lu Chen sighed at the stubborn ambition of this barbarian. Then he opened the leather scroll. This thick animal skin was folded into several layers, and the middle was tied with a thin rope. So it took a while to untie it. Perhaps it was because he knew the weight of this item. Lu Chen's movements were very careful. As for Hui Yan, who was standing to the side, he stared at Lu Chen's hand. After a while, Lu Chen finally completely opened the leather scroll. Under the dim light of dusk, the animal skin was unfolded in front of the two of them, revealing what was hidden inside. Hui Yan's breathing became noticeably rapid. His gaze swept over the animal skin, and then his eyes looked at Lu Chen. Deep in his eyes, there was a faint glimmer of anticipation. Lu Chen's expression was also solemn. He seriously looked at the writing on the animal skin, and there were also many strange portraits. For a good while, they didn't speak. Only when Lu Chen's gaze completely swept over the beast's skin and raised his head again did Hui Yan step forward with some excitement, asking him, "How is it? What is the witchcraft written on it? Is it powerful?" Lu Chen's expression looked a little strange. After taking a deep breath, he looked at Hui Yan and coughed, "My apologies, I don't understand." "You don't understand?" Hui Yan was stunned for a moment, as if he couldn't react. "Yes." Lu Chen nodded and pointed at the writing and pictures on the animal skin. "I really don't understand. These words and pictures, I don't know what they mean. Could it be that this is the language of the barbarians?" Hui Yan's eyebrows furrowed, but after a moment of hesitation, he shook his head and said, "No, I've seen this animal skin before. The words on it are different from our Black Fire tribe, and even the majority of the barbarian tribes." "Ah." Lu Chen was a little surprised. He didn't expect to hear such an answer. Wasn't this the witchcraft of the Black Fire tribe? Why couldn't even the barbarians of the Black Fire tribe understand it? What kind of logic was this? Hui Yan explained to Lu Chen, "Actually, I've asked my father about this before. I heard him say that the words on this kind of witchcraft scroll actually belong to shamans and priests. Only they can understand it. And the most amazing thing is that the priests don't need to specially study it. As long as they have this power, they can naturally understand these things." Lu Chen frowned and raised his head to look at Hui Yan. After a while, he suddenly laughed and said, "But I don't recognize it. Doesn't this mean that I'm not a priest at all?" Hui Yan was suddenly speechless. A pained and confused expression flashed across his face. He murmured, How is this possible? I clearly saw that you could use the power of the Black Fire. Is it because you're not a barbarian?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "Hui Yan, although I really want to return to the north, and I also want to help you, but this kind of thing, let's not deceive ourselves and others." Hui Yan stood stiffly in place, looking a little dazed. He was like a person who had countless beautiful hopes, but suddenly, all his beautiful dreams were shattered in an instant. Lu Chen looked like he couldn't bear to see Hui Yan, but he immediately came to his senses. He secretly scolded himself for being too soft-hearted recently. He even felt pity for a barbarian. Thinking of this, he hardened his heart, but then he became worried. If he really couldn't become a priest of the Black Fire tribe, then it would be even more difficult to ask Hui Yan about the secret of returning to the north. After all, this guy was someone who wouldn't divulge the secret even before he died. Sure enough, after a moment, Hui Yan's expression began to turn cold. He extended his hand to Lu Chen and said, "Return the animal skin to me." Lu Chen frowned and didn't immediately return it. He asked, "What do you mean by this? Since you're sure that you're not a priest of the Black Fire tribe, then I don't think there's a need to go to the fire god altar," Hui Yan said. Lu Chen nodded and said, "All right, this is a good thing. But since it's like this, I don't have any ill intentions towards the Black Fire tribe. I wonder if you can tell that secret to." "No." Hui Yan's expression was calm, but it was unquestionable. Lu Chen looked at him for a while, then suddenly snorted and said indifferently, wait a little longer, I might have a way. Let's try it. Chapter 302. Hui Yan looked suspiciously at Lu Chen and said, "What other ideas do you have?" Lu Chen said lightly, "Originally, I was not in the mood to become your tribe's priest, but in order to return to the north, I have to think of a way, right? In any case, let's see if your fire god has taken a liking to me." Fire god? Hui Yan repeated, still somewhat confused. But perhaps because there was still some hope left, he did not immediately go up to take the animal skin, but instead took a few steps back and looked at Lu Chen. Perhaps in his heart, he still hoped that Lu Chen could become the Black Fire priest. After all, the hope of the Black Fire tribe rising again after many years of decline seemed to be gathered on this human who had mysteriously appeared out of nowhere. Lu Chen took a deep breath and reached out to feel around his chest. A moment later, the fire god's staff appeared in his hand. Standing at the side, Hui Yan was startled, as if he had thought of something. He wanted to say something, but stopped himself. In the end, he stood at the side and watched silently. Lu Chen ignored him and only closed his eyes, as if adjusting his emotions in preparation. Atsu, who was at the side, did not seem to care about this. He looked up at the sky, only to see that the sky was gradually darkening. Stars gradually appeared in the clear night sky, twinkling in the distance. It was as if the gods of the heavens were silently watching the vicissitudes of the human world. Awoo! Suddenly, a mournful howl came from the side, startling Lu Chen and Hui Yan who had been holding their breath. When they turned their heads to look, they saw a huge black wolf straightening its neck and howling at the night sky. And in the distant sky, stars twinkled, and on the distant horizon, a bright moon was slowly rising. The world was cold and desolate. The moon was on the horizon, and the wolf was under the moon. In this vast wilderness, it looked like a boundless painting. Lu Chen retracted his gaze and coincidentally saw that Hui Yan had also turned to look at them. The two of them looked at each other and felt an indescribable sense of awkwardness. Fortunately, they were not the type of people to mind such things. Lu Chen nodded at him and said, "I'll start." Hui Yan responded, his expression turning serious once again. Lu Chen took a deep breath, clenched the Vulcan's staff in his hand, and narrowed his eyes. After a moment, he let out a soft shout, and the power of the black flames hidden deep in his body was activated. The fire god's staff reacted almost immediately. The various totems and runic patterns on the staff slowly shone brightly. At the same time, rays of light shot out. Although it was not the first time he had seen such a scene, when Hui Yan saw the radiance of the fire god's staff, his face still revealed an uncontrollable excitement. His lips moved slightly as he muttered something. No one knew what he was thinking about at that moment. After a moment, the black flames slowly appeared in Lu Chen's eyes. Immediately after, in the deep night, there seemed to be a distant and ancient roar. It was like the night wind blew past, like an ancient song faintly playing. The black flames suddenly rose up, bursting out from the man's body. They began to burn all over his flesh and skin. His clothes were not damaged, and they danced and swayed wildly. Under the moonlight, he was like a demon in the darkness, crazy and strange. Hui Yan's entire body shook, his eyes filled with disbelief. His mouth was so wide that he could not close it. At the same time, the beast's skin seemed to have received some kind of stimulation. It suddenly expanded and floated in front of Lu Chen, suddenly unfurling. Lu Chen's strange eyes, which were burning with black flames, looked over. On the beast's skin, there were specks of light that constantly flickered and danced. It was like joy, but also like crazy excitement. One by one, it was displayed in front of Lu Chen's eyes. Lu Chen's fingers stretched out in the black flames and slowly moved down. Then, a voice came from the wind and drilled into Hui Yan's ears. There really is a record of witchcraft on it, but it seems to be incomplete. That's right, that's right. Hui Yan said excitedly. This is only a remnant of a scroll, but there should be some records on it. What is there? Lu Chen, who was wrapped in black flames, glanced at the beast skin remnant that was floating in the air. At the same time, he slowly said, "There's not much left. There are only 2, no, 3 types of witchcraft. One is bloodthirsty, one is hellfire, and the last one is..." Halfway through his sentence, when he was still missing the name of the last witchcraft, Lu Chen's body suddenly trembled. His words were abruptly cut off. Just like that, he became silent and stared fixedly at the beast skin remnant, not saying anything for a long time. Hui Yan, who was at the side, was so excited that he was grinding his teeth. Seeing Lu Chen suddenly cut off, he couldn't help but ask, "There's still one more, what is that witchcraft?" After a pause, he was a little worried and said, "Why, could it be that you can't understand it? Or that witchcraft is also incomplete?" "Neither, I can recognize it." Lu Chen's eyes, which were flashing with black flames, were still staring at the beast skin. His voice seemed to have some strange emotions. It was a little more cold, and also seemed to have some deep hatred. There was even a trace of indescribable blankness. All kinds of emotions that he wanted to say but didn't want to say were intertwined at this moment, causing his expression to look especially complicated. These words, I can recognize them all, including the third witchcraft. Lu Chen paused for a while and said, "This is Black Flame Curse. You really can understand this witchcraft scroll?" Hui Yan excitedly waved his fist, his face was completely overjoyed. For a moment, he didn't notice the somewhat strange expression on Lu Chen's face. Then he couldn't help but step forward and said, "I am not mistaken, you are the priest that the fire god sent to guide our Black Fire tribe." Lu Chen didn't immediately answer him, but instead closed his eyes. After a while, the black flames surrounding his body slowly weakened and gradually retracted back into his flesh. When Lu Chen opened his eyes again, the black flames had completely disappeared. The beast's skin floating in the air trembled for a moment, then slowly floated down. Lu Chen stretched out his hand to catch it, then turned around and handed it to Hui Yan. Hui Yan shook his head and said, "This beast's skin is originally a sacred inheritance belonging to the priest. It's just that our tribe hasn't had a priest for many years, so it was in my care. Now that you are the priest recognized by the fire god, this scroll should be given to you." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he raised the fire god's staff in his hand and said, "Including this?" This time, Hui Yan hesitated for a moment, but very quickly nodded very firmly and said, "Including this fire god's staff." Lu Chen looked deeply at this barbarian, then nodded and said, "Okay." Although there are 3 witchcraft on this scroll, to be honest, I don't think that even if I learn these things, I will be able to bear the hope of the Black Fire tribe's rise by myself. As they continued on their journey, Lu Chen said to Hui Yan. Hui Yan's face didn't show any signs of surprise, he looked very calm and said, "I know." Lu Chen was a little surprised. He looked at him and said, "You're actually not anxious?" Hui Yan smiled, still looking a little helpless. He said, "Back then, the strongest part of our tribe's inheritance was actually left in the hands of our brothers who couldn't return to the ancestral land in the land of chaos. What we have now is probably not even 10% of what we had back then." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Bloodlust is a support spell. After I use it, I can stimulate the power of the Black Fire tribe's warriors and increase their battle power by more than double in a short period of time. But after that, there will be damage to the body. The more potential power that is stimulated, the more serious the damage will be. In the most serious cases, there is a possibility of death." Hui Yan didn't care about the last sentence. He nodded heavily and said with a face full of excitement, "This is the witchcraft that our tribe has been looking forward to." Lu Chen looked at him strangely and continued, "The second, Hellfire, is a powerful spell that directly attacks the enemy. It can engulf and burn an area in a short period of time, but it can't be used for long unless it is supported by powerful spiritual power." Hui Yan nodded repeatedly. Lu Chen continued, "As for the third, Black Flame Curse, this kind of curse can't be used immediately, but it entangles the soul. Those who are hit by it will almost certainly die. It is a very terrifying curse." Hui Yan made an "oh" sound. It seemed that he didn't care much about the third witchcraft. His mind was probably on how to increase the battle power of the entire Black Fire tribe. Lu Chen looked at him and wanted to say something, but then he held it in. Although it doesn't seem to be much now, with these witchcraft, the battle power of our Black Fire tribe will definitely rise to a new level. At least in the northern wilderness, the Thunder Lizard, Divine Wood, and Ghost Fox tribes, who were originally about the same strength as us, will definitely not be our match. Hui Yan looked very excited, full of anticipation and hope for the future. Lu Chen thought for a moment and asked him, "Then do you know more witchcraft?" "The more the merrier." "Of course." Hui Yan nodded, but there was a hint of a bitter smile on his face. He said, "But we really only have this little on hand. Even this was preserved by our ancestors with their lives. As for the other small tribes, they don't even have this little heritage." At this point, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something and said to Lu Chen, "Originally, our Black Fire tribe was very strong in the area of witchcraft, but most of the inheritance was indeed in the hands of our brothers." "You came from the north. When you passed through the disorienting lands, did you hear of the Black Fire tribe there? Or perhaps, a tribe similar to our tribe?" Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. He looked at Hui Yan, only to see Hui Yan looking at him with a face full of enthusiasm and hope. At that moment, countless figures and scenes flashed through Lu Chen's mind. The soaring flames, the corpses of the dead, and the painful and ferocious memories of the past flashed past one by one. But after a moment, he smiled at Hui Yan and said calmly, "I've never heard of it." Chapter 303. Haven't heard of it? A trace of disappointment flashed across Hui Yan's face, but he quickly shook his head and regained his calmness. Perhaps this was a hope that even they didn't dare to hope for. In that harsh and desperate situation, in front of the overwhelming and incomparably powerful cultivator army of the human race, all of the barbarians that remained in the chaotic lands had a narrow escape. The night passed just like that. The clouds seemed to be calm and the wind was gentle, but the nights in the wilderness were still very cold. After dawn the next day, Hui Yan and Lu Chen continued their journey with Atsu. Lu Chen followed him for a while and noticed that they were walking towards the south. He couldn't help but ask in surprise, "The fire god altar is further south?" "Yes." Hui Yan said, "It's in the southern land with abundant water and grass." "Huh?" Hui Yan looked at the surprised Lu Chen and snorted, "You don't really think that our southern wilderness is such a barren and withered land, do you?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "No one has ever been here before, it's not strange that they don't know." Hui Yan thought about it and felt that this was indeed the case. Since ancient times, the barbarians had crossed the chaotic lands several times, but because of the incomparably chaotic nature of the 5 elements, the human race had never gone south. Those with profound cultivation were especially sensitive to the chaotic nature of the 5 elements. Ordinary people without spiritual power were not afraid of the chaotic nature of the 5 elements, but they simply couldn't cross the chaotic lands. Even if they were brought over, once they reached the southern wilderness, as an ordinary person, only death awaited them. Therefore, for many years, there really wasn't a single person from the human race that had ventured deep into the southern wilderness. Thinking of this, Hui Yan's expression became a little strange. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen smiled and didn't avoid it. He said with a smile, "What's wrong? Do you feel that something's wrong?" Hui Yan coughed and said, More or less. But it doesn't matter. In any case, the most powerful cultivators of your human race can't come here. It's not a big deal for me to bring you there." Lu Chen smiled and nodded. He then said, "Yes. It's impossible for me to exterminate the entire barbarian race of the southern wilderness by myself, right?" Hui Yan also smiled and could not help but laugh heartily. Regardless of whether it was Hui Yan or Lu Chen himself, neither of them took it to heart. In the blink of an eye, they forgot about it. Along the way, they mostly talked about the past and present of the Black Fire tribe, as well as the various legends of the mysterious fire god that was worshipped by the Black Fire tribe. From Hui Yan's words, Lu Chen learned that the Black Fire tribe once had a glorious history. In the vast southern wilderness, they were once the most powerful tribe. They occupied the largest and best land and ruled over countless weak tribes. But this was all in the past. A few hundred years was enough to erase all the glory. Now, even ordinary small tribes like the Thunder Lizard and the Ghost Fox could be on equal footing with the Black Fire tribe. What made Hui Yan most distressed was that he found that more and more people in the Black Fire tribe, and it could even be said that the majority of the tribe had accepted this reality. They began to forget the glory and splendor of their ancestors. They accepted the suffering and weakness of today. They struggled just to survive and prolong their feeble existence. They were like the weakest sand rabbits in the wilderness that were preyed on by countless beasts. Moreover, they seemed to feel very happy and normal. Lu Chen listened quietly, and most of the time, he didn't say a word. It was only when Hui Yan paused that he suddenly asked, "You don't want this?" "Of course I don't want to." Hui Yan straightened his tall and burly body. From his body, one could still vaguely see the heroic bearing of the invincible Black Fire warrior who had once galloped across this land. He said, "Our tribe shouldn't be like this. We must take back what our ancestors left behind." Lu Chen looked at him and didn't speak for a while. Hui Yan felt that Lu Chen's gaze was strange, and asked with some doubt, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen said, "I know you have great ambitions. But have you ever thought that if you insist on doing this, you might also kidnap the entire Black Fire tribe to do that extremely dangerous thing with you?" Hui Yan immediately said, "That's not dangerous. It's to follow the great cause of restoring the glory of our ancestors. Even if it's a little bit of risk, it's nothing." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Then have you ever thought that perhaps not everyone in the Black Fire tribe is like you, willing to do this at all costs? Perhaps some people." Don't stare at me like that. I have to make these things clear to you. Otherwise, if I really become the priest of the Black Fire tribe in the future, I would at least know what to do." Hui Yan nodded silently. After a while, he said, "Okay, continue." Lu Chen said again, "If there really are some people in the Black Fire tribe who don't want to fight with their lives on the line, and don't want to shed blood for the glory of your ancestors that you have long lost, then what will you do?" When Hui Yan heard Lu Chen speak halfway, his face had already turned cold. After a while, he said coldly, "With the great cause of our ancestors before us, we can't have such spineless people. And as a member of the Black Fire tribe, it's only right for us to fight with our lives on the line." "Is it for the tribe, or for your dream?" Lu Chen interrupted him, staring intently at this barbarian's eyes. Hui Yan's gaze was slightly cold as he looked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen met his gaze without flinching. After a while, Hui Yan said indifferently, "It's for the Black Fire tribe." Lu Chen stared at him for a while, then nodded and said, "Okay, I understand." According to Hui Yan, the holy land of the Black Fire tribe, the fire god altar, was hidden somewhere deep in the mountains in the south. That place used to be the territory of the Black Fire tribe when they were at their peak, but times had already changed. As for why the Black Fire tribe abandoned their ancestral land and went to such a desolate place in the north, Hui Yan did not explain the reason in detail. But Lu Chen could more or less guess that it was because they were too weak and were chased away. There couldn't be any other reason. Lu Chen wisely did not ask about these sad past events, but he still asked Hui Yan about which powerful barbarian tribes were in control of the wasteland. After all, if he really had to work hard for the Black Fire tribe in the future, he had to know about these things. But when he asked about this matter, a strange feeling floated in his heart. It was a faintly familiar feeling, as if he had suddenly returned to 10 years ago. At that time, he was still a shadow. Now, he seemed to have transformed into a shadow, intentionally or unintentionally asking about the secrets of the wasteland, even if he might never be able to return to the human race. Hui Yan did not doubt him, and probably thought that it was normal for Lu Chen to know about these things for the sake of the Black Fire tribe, so he very readily told Lu Chen everything. Nowadays in the southern wilderness, there was no longer a powerful tribe like the Black Fire tribe that stood out like the sun in the sky. Instead, there were the 4 great barbarian tribes of water, wood, earth, and thunder. It could be said that the southern wilderness was divided and ruled by the four great barbarian tribes. And the most similar thing about these four great barbarian tribes was that each of them had a great shaman whose cultivation, experience, wisdom, and knowledge were far superior to ordinary priests. The legendary shaman who could move mountains and fill the seas, and had boundless magical power. Lu Chen was silent, deep in thought, and did not speak. Around noon of this day, Lu Chen and Hui Yen suddenly discovered a strange movement in the wasteland in front of them. Yellow sand billowed and blew with the wind. The momentum was very similar to when they encountered the wolf pack a few days ago. Both of them were startled. However, it was fortunate that they were still quite a distance away. Just as they were about to avoid it, Hui Yen suddenly seemed to have seen something in the distance. He abruptly halted his footsteps and carefully observed the smoke and dust for a long while. He looked at the faintly discernible running figures behind the yellow sand, as well as the cries of an even larger and more ferocious army. He fell into deep thought. A moment later, he let out a long sigh and spoke in a somewhat helpless manner. I think I know why the wolf pack has suddenly come to the north. Well, what is the reason? The Thunder Shaman's tribe has come. Chapter 304. The name, Thunder Shaman, made Lu Chen immediately think of the Fire Shaman. The impression of that old barbarian shaman in his memory was so deep that he subconsciously turned his head to look at Hui Yen. They both had the bloodline of the Black Fire tribe, but Hui Yen didn't seem to have any similarities with that incomparably powerful fire shaman. One was old, gloomy and deep, while the other was hot-blooded and full of hope. The difference was like the sun and the moon. But then again, the difference in strength between the two was like heaven and earth. In fact, Hui Yen simply couldn't be compared with the fire shaman. Lu Chen felt strange that such a strange idea had suddenly appeared in his mind. As for the thunder shaman that Hui Yen had recognized, he was one of the most powerful figures in the southern wilderness. The tribe he belonged to was called Thunder Cloud. It was similar to the Thunder Lizard tribe that Lu Chen had seen before, but there was a world of difference between the two. The Thunder Cloud tribe relied on the protection of the Thunder Shaman to become one of the most powerful tribes in the wilderness in recent years. They and several other powerful tribes divided and occupied the former territory of the Black Fire tribe, which was the most fertile land in the southern wilderness. Their strength was far above that of the Black Fire, Thunder Lizard, and other small tribes. Oh, so that's how it is. But what does this have to do with the wolf pack that you mentioned? Lu Chen asked Hui Yen. Hui Yen glanced at the yellow sand that had been blown up and said, those powerful tribes often like to hunt. Huh? Hui Yen said, tribes like our Black Fire tribe usually go out to hunt. We find and kill some demon beasts and drag them back to the camp, which is a good food rations. But tribes like the Thunder Cloud tribe have already prepared all the supplies and don't lack food. Therefore, they often hold hunts. Although they also hunt demon beasts, it's more to show off their martial prowess. Lu Chen was silent for a while, then said, it sounds like their hunting momentum is much greater than yours. That's a lot bigger. A trace of helplessness flashed across Hui Yan's face as he said, for a top clan like Lei Yun, the number of demonic beasts they kill in a single hunt is at least 10 times that of us. Therefore, at times like this, some of the intelligent demonic beasts have no choice but to avoid the sharp edge, and leave their original habitats to flee in all directions. Only now did Lu Chen understand why Hui Yen was confused about why the wolf pack came here. These demon wolves did not belong here, and they probably did not like this barren land, so they would not come here. It was only after receiving the crushing expulsion of the Thundercloud tribe that the wolf pack had no choice but to temporarily hide here. And the price was that the two of them were almost buried in the belly of the wolf. I wonder if this is considered an undeserved calamity, then what do we do now? Lu Chen asked Hui Yen. With regards to the situation of the southern wilderness, Lu Chen was almost in the dark. After all, no human had come here for many years, so it could be said that he knew nothing about the situation of the barbarian tribe. He could only honestly ask this barbarian, who had treated him quite well. Hui Yen answered him without hesitation, of course, avoid them, and don't provoke them. Huh? Lu Chen was a little surprised. In his original impression, the barbarian tribe were mostly ferocious, and lacked the ability to adapt. They were often fearless in the face of danger, and refused to retreat. However, Hui Yan's performance these past few days had made him have a whole new level of respect for him. From the first time they met, to the way back, to the camp of the Black Fire tribe, and then all the way here, Hui Yan had displayed a special characteristic that was different from the majority of the barbarian tribe. He was both brave and fearless, yet he was calm and wise, and it was even to the extent that he could endure and make concessions. Moreover, he possessed an ability that exceeded everyone's expectations. Once he noticed something unusual about Lu Chen, he'd practically thought through everything in an extremely short period of time and decided to make a huge gamble. If the person who made the decision was Lu Chen, to be honest, even Lu Chen didn't believe that he could do what Hui Yan did. But unfortunately, there was no if in this world. Do we have to avoid these people? Lu Chen asked him again. Hui Yan nodded and said, this can't be helped. All the tribes in the wilderness will not be too polite to foreign barbarians who travel alone. They will usually interrogate and search them. If they encounter a situation that is not pleasing to the eye, and their own tribe is strong, they will directly attack or even kill them. This is also a common thing. Lu Chen grinned, and thought that in the southern wilderness, martial strength was indeed the most important thing. If one were to travel alone, not only would he have to guard against demon beasts and all kinds of dangers, he would also have to be careful of his fellow barbarians, as long as they were not from the same tribe. Then, the two of them took a turn, and avoided the yellow sand in front of them, and turned to the other side. But in the middle of this, a mournful wolf howl suddenly sounded from the yellow sand in the air. Atsu was the first to stop, and then looked back. At this time, Lu Chen noticed that there seemed to be a trace of anger in Atsu's eyes, and he would occasionally let out a low growl. It seemed that he was somewhat angry. And after a while, a cool breeze blew from the sky, brushing against the yellow sand. They finally saw a corner of the yellow sand. When they looked from afar, they saw a pack of wolves. Those ferocious and terrifying demon beasts were madly howling in pain at this moment. Hundreds of agile barbarians were surrounding them. They were holding all kinds of weapons in their hands, and were ferociously stabbing the bodies of these wolves. Blood-red light burst out from under the tough fur, followed by unimaginable painful howls. The strong male wolves in the wolf pack were desperately fighting against those barbarian warriors, trying to protect the weaker female wolves and the pups so that they could escape. However, under the yellow sand, the blades were like snow. The barbarians had formed a circle, and were laughing wildly as they gathered. The weaker female wolves and wolf cubs were the first to be chopped to death. Then, the crazed male wolves launched a desperate attack against the barbarian warriors. But they were met with an even more powerful and terrifying force. It didn't take long for the entire pack of wolves to fall into a pool of blood. It was unknown how many severed limbs had fallen in this wilderness. It was a bloody scene. This originally powerful pack of wolves had been completely annihilated in one day. Let's go. Lu Chen was the first to react. He lowered his voice and asked Hui Yan, who was in a daze, let's go. Hui Yan seemed to have woken up from a dream. His body trembled, and then he said softly, yes, let's go. The two had already packed up. They didn't have anything else to worry about. Just like that, they left with large strides. The strong smell of blood filled this land. They killed an entire pack of demon wolves. Lu Chen asked Hui Yan as they walked. What if they caught one or a group of people? Those people will die even more miserably. Although those demon wolves are ferocious, most of them were killed with a single slash. But if the two of us were to fall into the hands of the Thundercloud tribe, what will happen? Hui Yan smiled. We barbarians don't have such a thing as a captive. They will die. Yes, and they will usually die very miserably. In those large tribes, there is no lack of madmen who like to torture us small tribes. Lu Chen frowned. He didn't say anything, but his expression didn't look good either. Hui Yan quickly walked forward. At the same time, he said, "Don't worry. As long as we go to the fire god altar, we won't let anyone do as they please." Lu Chen glanced at him. He didn't know why Hui Yan was so confident. But it seemed that he worshipped the fire god. "Hui Yan." "Yes? If I really become a priest in the Black Fire tribe in the future, I will help you. But there are conditions. But it is still too early to talk about these things. But you keep saying that the relationship between a priest and a shaman is only that of a superior and subordinate. Then, do I have any hope of becoming a shaman in the future?" Hui Yan was startled. He first smiled, then became silent. After thinking for a while, he said, "You can." Lu Chen was shocked. "You really can?" Hui Yan took a deep breath and said softly, "If you can become a shaman in the future, then it will be the time for our Black Fire tribe to return to the central region. It will be the time for us to recover the glory of our ancestors." Lu Chen stared at him for a while. After confirming that this different barbarian was not joking, he couldn't help but be silent. He then nodded and said, "Very good." Chapter 305. Hui Yan was very afraid of the Thunder Cloud tribe where the Thunder Shaman was. He took Lu Chen far away from the main force of the Thunder Cloud tribe. Even if he had to take a big detour and walk twice the distance, he was still willing. Lu Chen did not say much about this. He only chatted with Hui Yan along the way, and inquired more about the situation of the southern border barbarian tribe, especially the powerful shaman that Hui Yan mentioned. In Hui Yan's eyes, or from what he said, the shaman that Lu Chen heard was undoubtedly an exceptionally powerful and terrifying existence. It could turn the world upside down, move the mountains and drain the seas, and destroy everything in the southern wilderness, unless another shaman stood up to contend against it. Lu Chen did not comment on this, and most of the time he remained silent. But it was not like he had never seen the so-called barbarian shaman before. The fire shaman in the Battle of the Desolate Valley was indeed an extremely powerful barbarian. He had left Lu Chen with an unforgettable pain that made him wish he was dead for many years. But even so, Lu Chen did not think that the fire shaman's strength could reach the terrifying level that Hui Yan described. In fact, Lu Chen had great doubts about whether the barbarian shaman's strength could approach the level of the deity transformation stage of the human race. In his view, the barbarian shaman's strength should be similar to the Yuanying stage of the human race, perhaps a little stronger, but certainly not much stronger. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. If the barbarian shaman was really as powerful and terrifying as Hui Yan said, then there was no need for anyone else. Just the 3 or 4 shamans in the southern wilderness could probably directly flatten the vast divine land of the human race in the north. Unfortunately, now that 1,000 years had passed, the barbarian tribe could only curl up in the southern wilderness, relying on the natural barrier of the land of chaos to separate the north and the south to survive. Yes, when Lu Chen looked at Hui Yan and the vast wilderness, these were some words of disdain that flashed across his heart. The barbarians were certainly strong, but in the face of the powerful strength of the human race in the cultivation age, if there was no barrier of the land of chaos, the southern wilderness barbarians would only have a dead end. After avoiding the Thunder Cloud tribe, Lu Chen, Hui Yan, Atsu, and the 2 humans and 1 wolf had a relatively smooth journey. They took a long detour in the middle and ran into some small troubles. Most of them were encounters with other barbarians or powerful demonic beasts. If they encountered a small demonic beast, they would kill it if they could. If they couldn't defeat a big demonic beast, they would run away. As for the other barbarians, they would avoid them as much as they could. If they really couldn't avoid them, they would ask Hui Yan to come forward and negotiate with them. Originally, Lu Chen's identity and appearance were a huge problem, but Hui Yan was clearly prepared. He pulled out a linen hood that could cover his head, covering Lu Chen's face. Those barbarians were simple-minded, so they didn't check carefully. They probably didn't expect that a northerner would suddenly come to the wilderness in these thousands of years. However, this linen robe was coarse and shabby, making it very uncomfortable. Lu Chen asked Hui Yan where it came from. Hui Yan laughed dryly and said that it was passed down by an ancestor when the Black Fire tribe still had priests. Lu Qin smiled faintly. It seemed that the Black Fire tribe had been in a miserable state for many years. Along the way, although little troublemakers appeared from time to time, they didn't run into a desperate situation like when they were surrounded by the wolf pack. Finally, they arrived at the sacred mountain where the fire god's altar was. In Huiyan's words, it was thanks to the fire god's blessing that they were able to arrive safely. Lu Qin asked him with a smile. If the fire god was really blessing the Black Fire tribe and Huiyan, why didn't the Black Fire tribe improve after so many years? Huiyan retorted without hesitation. All of this must be the fire god's test for the Black Fire tribe. It was a punishment for the Black Fire tribe's wrongdoings. Now that the punishment was over, the fire god would naturally protect them again. Lu Qin asked curiously, "How do you know the punishment is over?" Huiyan pointed at him and said, "Aren't you here? You came here and became the Black Fire tribe's priest. That is the fire god's reward for the Black Fire tribe. Since the reward is here, then the punishment is over. There is great hope for the revival of the Black Fire tribe." Lu Qin speechlessly looked up at the sky and smiled bitterly. The so-called sacred mountain was actually a towering mountain range in the southern wilderness. From the outside, there wasn't anything too strange about it. It was similar to the hills and peaks that Lu Qin saw along the way. Most of the peaks were bare, and some parts were sparsely covered with trees. It was completely incomparable to the fertile and dense forests of the human Xiationists. But even so, looking at it from another angle, this kind of desolation was actually filled with a vigorous and boundless primitive aura. There was a faint sense of valiance. The sacred mountain was also called the Fire God Mountain, but these two names were used by the Black Fire tribe. For many years, they had kept this important altar and holy land a secret. Therefore, the other barbarians didn't know about this place and only treated it as an ordinary mountain. They didn't even have a name. After Huiyan arrived at the Fire God Mountain, he immediately became excited. He knelt down at the foot of the mountain and kowtowed heavily while chanting. Lu Qin listened from the side. The general meaning was that the Black Fire tribe was guilty of letting the fire god's sacred land desolate for so many years. One day, with the blessing of the god, the Black Fire tribe would rise again and rebuild the sacred altar to increase the glory of the fire god. In short, he made a lot of beautiful promises. Huiyan stood up with a pious expression after he finished saying these words, or rather, after he finished drawing these large flatbreads, he turned around and glanced at Lu Qin. He was startled and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why is your expression so strange?" Lu Qin said, "It's nothing. I just suddenly thought of something. What you said just now sounded very familiar. Is it that every time the Black Fire tribe prays to the fire god for so many years, does it?" Huiyan thought about it and looked a little embarrassed. But he still nodded and said, "More or less." Lu Qin shook his head and walked forward. At the same time, he said, "It's nothing. Let's go. I hope the fire god can really hear your wishes." Gods were all high and mighty, mysterious, and unfathomable. Therefore, whether or not the fire god heard Huiyan's prayer and listened to his words, no one knew. But at least on the way into the mountains, they had a smooth journey and did not meet with any trouble. For this, Huiyan thanked the fire god 3 or 4 times along the way. Even Lu Qin had to admit that this barbarian's worship of the fire god was indestructible and deeply rooted. But at this moment, Lu Qin had already lost interest in this problem. He was more concerned about another matter. "Huiyan." Lu Qin called out to the barbarian. "Didn't you say that the Black Fire tribe left this place many years ago? Why do I feel like you're still very familiar with this place?" Huiyan's face was filled with pain and bitterness as he said, "Most of the tribesmen really don't know anything about this place. At most, they only know that there is a sacred altar in the south that our Black Fire tribe's ancestors worshipped. For a long time, this secret has only been passed down by the tribe leader's bloodline. Then, every time the successor comes of age, they will find a chance to sneak here once to get to know the old path and worship the fire god. Just like that, this secret has been passed down from generation to generation." Lu Chen frowned. Has this always been the way to pass down the secret? After so many years, even with the Black Fire tribe's current predicament, even if you are the bloodline of the tribe leader, you still haven't lost this secret. It really isn't easy. Hui Yan proudly said, this is all because of the fire god's blessing. Lu Chen. Alright, you're right. Fire God Mountain looked tall and majestic. Although many of the peaks were bare, there was a powerful aura within the desolation. Hui Yan led Lu Chen and Atsu into the mountains for another 2 days, and finally arrived at a remote canyon. When Lu Chen arrived here, especially in this canyon where black rocks could be seen everywhere, including many large black rocks exposed in the gravel, he felt his feet and surroundings start to heat up. The deeper they went, the stronger this feeling became. At the same time, the number of black rocks around them increased. For some reason, Lu Chen suddenly thought of the terrifying abyss of chaos that he had accidentally approached. In the surroundings of that most dangerous place in the world, there seemed to be many black rocks. At the same time, in the depths of that strange and unpredictable abyss of chaos, black seemed to be the main color there. But of course, this place could not be compared to the abyss of chaos. Hui Yan led Lu Chen all the way to the deepest part of the canyon, and then looked around vigilantly. After confirming that no one was spying on them, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times in a pious manner. Then, he found an inconspicuous rock pillar that was half exposed from the ground, about 3 feet high. Lu Chen watched from the side for a long time, but he couldn't figure out what was so special about this black rock pillar. However, Hui Yan had chosen it. With this black rock pillar as the starting point, the barbarian walked 7 steps towards the north, then another 36 steps towards the east, and another 3 steps towards the north. Finally, he stopped at an open space. Under Lu Chen's somewhat surprised gaze, Hui Yan laid down on the ground, and with an extremely strange rhythm, patted the ground 4 times in different directions within a 3-foot radius. Just as Lu Chen was feeling bewildered, suddenly, he heard a muffled sound. A heavy stone slab slowly moved away from the ground, revealing a deep, bottomless tunnel that extended downwards. Let's go. Hui Yan turned and said to Lu Chen, the altar is below. Chapter 306. The altar is underground? Lu Chen was a little surprised. He glanced at Hui Yan and asked. Hui Yan nodded his head and beckoned to Lu Chen to follow. Then, he took the lead and walked down. Lu Chen turned his head to look at Atsu. He saw that Atsu was also staring at the dark and deep underground tunnel. Apart from that, there didn't seem to be any special reaction. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, but he still followed. Atsu followed behind him and walked into the stone tunnel. When they entered the underground cave, they saw Hui Yan standing at the side of the stone steps that extended downwards. He reached out his hand and grabbed a stone on the wall. Then, they heard a rumbling sound, and the heavy stone slab closed behind them. The light in the cave suddenly dimmed. But after a while, when Lu Chen's eyes gradually adapted to the darkness, he discovered that in the distance of this underground passage, there was a faint dark red light swaying gently. Although the light was still very weak, he could already vaguely see the shadows of the stone steps around him. There was a stuffy air coming from the front, but it wasn't stifling. It was like a faintly discernible hot wind blowing from the depths of the cave. Apart from that, there was nothing strange. The surroundings were very quiet. After a while, Hui Yan's low voice sounded from the side. He said in a low voice, "Let's go down." The underground stone tunnel was big enough that even a burly barbarian like Hui Yan could walk with his back straight. Lu Chen followed behind him in silence. His eyes would occasionally look around. At this moment, the surroundings were quiet. Apart from the sound of their footsteps, there seemed to be no other movement. It was so quiet that one could even hear their own heartbeat. With the help of the dim light, Lu Chen saw that both sides of the tunnel were incomparably hard stone walls. He had never seen the stone on the walls before. They looked dark and deep, and there were some strange patterns on them. As he walked, he found an opportunity to touch the stone wall beside him. He immediately discovered that the stone wall was not cold, but rather warm. This was obviously different from an ordinary underground cave, but it seemed to make sense that this was the location of the fire god altar worshipped by the Black Fire tribe. After all, if the gods were called the god of fire, it was only natural for them to be scorching hot. However, there was another question that Lu Qin did not understand. Therefore, he could not help but ask Huyen, why was this altar built underground? Huyen, who was walking in front, paused for a moment, as if he was a little taken aback by this. He then said, I don't know either. It's been like this ever since I found out about this place. He paused for a moment, and then, as if he wanted to affirm Lu Qin, he added, it has been like this since the time of our ancestors, or should I say, since the time of the fire god altar. Lu Qin furrowed his brows, and his expression was a little puzzled. He said, but the gods and the like, in the legends, don't they always live in the celestial realm? Huyen laughed and waved his hand, saying, I've never heard of this. It's probably what you humans say. Moreover, even if the fire god altar was built underground, there must be an ancient reason. You can't say that the fire god is not a god from the celestial realm, right? Lu Qin wanted to say something, but stopped. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, what you said makes sense. Huyen laughed, and did not take it to heart. He continued to walk forward. Lu Qin looked at his back, and his expression changed. The light and shadow from afar fell on his face, making his expression look gloomy and uncertain. In the human race of the divine continent, since ancient times, the gods lived in the heavens, and all the altars were built in the open. Apart from natural disasters, landslides, no other god's sacrificial ground would be in the dark underground. In the long history of the human race, there were no gods who built their altars underground. Those who built their altars deep underground had nothing to do with the gods of the heavens. What was hidden deep underground was the third realm that corresponded to the immortal realm and the human realm, the demons and monsters of the underworld. When Lu Qin thought of this, he felt a slight chill in his heart. When he looked at Huyen's back, his gaze became cold. However, Lu Qin had no intention of saying these words to this barbarian who worshipped the fire god. Otherwise, Huyen might not even want the priest that he had been looking forward to, and would fight to the death with him, a human who slandered the gods. When no one spoke, time seemed to pass especially slowly. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the dark and gloomy cave, and the stone steps under their feet seemed to extend endlessly downwards. Lu Qin felt that he had walked for a very long time, but the scenery in front of him did not seem to have changed much. However, for some reason, when he looked at this dark tunnel that went deep underground, Lu Qin had a frightening feeling that this was the entrance to the depths of the ghost world. The only thing that changed was that the originally faint and blurry light in front of them, as they continued to descend, it finally began to gradually become clearer and brighter. After walking like this for an unknown amount of time, Lu Qin felt that the surrounding air suddenly began to become stuffy. At the same time, the red light in front of them suddenly brightened, and then a strange low muffled sound was heard. The sound was like a tide, and also like a gale, vigorous and solemn. Just as Lu Qin was surprised and bewildered, Huyen suddenly stopped in his tracks, and then with a tone that was mixed with excitement, admiration, worship and fanaticism, he said, "We're here." The "here," in his words, naturally referred to the fire god altar. Lu Qin took a deep breath, hurried a few steps, quickly walked to Huyen's side, and then looked ahead. Right now the dark red light had already become extremely bright, because the source of the light had already appeared in front of him. When the magnificent scene appeared in front of Lu Qin's eyes, even with his vast experience, he couldn't help but tremble. In the depths of this deep underground cave, there really wasn't any immortal aura like in the legends of the human race, but here there was a completely different kind of majestic existence. At the end of the black stone tunnel, there was a huge underground cave. A wave of heat blasted out, accompanied by rumbling sounds. That was the source of all the red light, that was the scarlet red burning magma. The scene in front of Lu Qin's eyes, without any concealment, appeared in front of him, the huge underground cave, crisscrossing rivers, a few narrow rocks connected to form a passageway, the rest of the place was completely filled with scorching and scarlet-red magma. All the magma was constantly flowing, big and small bubbles rising on the surface of the magma, expanding, and then exploding. Even from far away, he could feel the scorching heat. It wasn't hard to imagine the terrifying temperature of the magma. The entire subterranean cavern was surrounded by this huge magma river. All of the magma flowed continuously in one direction, and everywhere it passed, flames would burn. And in the deepest part of the cave, there was a huge black boulder that was only 3 feet tall on the surface of the magma. It had a circumference of 2 feet, and there were 5 black stone pillars towering over it. When the magma flowed past this boulder, it was unknown what kind of strange terrain there was, but a huge whirlpool actually appeared. As a result, all the magma spun and whistled. Contrary to its previous slow speed, it rushed into this whirlpool at an increasingly fast speed. Countless scorching flames struck the hard black boulder, making a sound like thunder, and then finally disappeared into the depths of the whirlpool, as if once again flowing into the depths of the earth, that unpredictable place. That is the fire god altar. Hui Yan turned around, and said loudly to Lu Qin. In this underground cave, because the sound of the magma river was rather loud, he had no choice but to raise his voice. Lu Qin took a deep breath, immediately felt the scorching heat in the air directly into his lungs. There was a slight burning sensation. His expression changed slightly. This was the first time he had seen this kind of place. It was really strange and unpredictable. Then he turned to Hui Yan, also raising his voice to ask him, "Then what do we do now?" "Go there." Hui Yan pointed at the huge boulder with the 5 black stone pillars from afar, and then walked forward. Lu Qin hesitated for a moment, then turned around and made a gesture to Atsu, indicating that it should stay in this cave passage. Then he himself followed Hui Yan and walked over. The path to the huge black boulder, which was also the fire god altar that Hui Yan spoke of, was actually a few large boulders that were exposed on the surface of the magma river. They were a little closer to each other. Some places could be walked, and some places had to risk jumping over the magma. Looking at the raging flames below, the bright red and bubbling magma, even Hui Yan, who worshipped the fire god very much and was an extremely valiant barbarian himself, couldn't help but become cautious and solemn. If he were to accidentally make a mistake, then he would only end up with nothing left of his corpse. Hui Yan took the lead and walked forward, and Lu Qin followed behind him, walking and leaping forward on the black stone path. Not long after, they came to a fork in the road. Separated by the magma, one side was the huge boulder that was close to the fire god altar, while the other side that was separated by the magma extended to the other side of the cave. Just as Lu Qin was about to jump over, he was suddenly pulled back by Hui Yan. Lu Qin looked at him with some surprise, only to see Hui Yan pointing to the other side, and said, "Go that way." As he said this, he leaped and jumped towards the rock that was even further away. Lu Qin hesitated for a moment, then also followed, and then asked Hui Yan, "Why not take the shortcut?" Hui Yan shook his head, and said, "This is the rule passed down by our black flame ancestor. At the fire god altar, we can only take the long road, we cannot take the shortcut." Lu Qin was silent for a moment, his eyes slightly flickered, and said, "What if we take the shortcut, what will happen?" Hui Yan, who was about to walk forward, suddenly stopped, and then stopped. Chapter 307. What, you can't say, or this question can't be asked. Seeing that Hui Yan's expression was a little strange, Lu Qin didn't show any fear, and calmly asked another question. Hui Yan was silent for a while, then said, "I don't know." Hui Yan said, "For so many years, everyone who came here followed the teachings of our ancestors. No one has ever doubted these words, and no one has ever asked this question." Lu Qin nodded, and didn't say anything more. Hui Yan's gaze was fixed on Lu Qin. After a while, he suddenly said, "I originally thought that you were a gift from the fire god to our black fire tribe, and that you would lead our tribe to prosperity. But now, I suddenly can't make up my mind." Why is that?" Lu Qin raised his eyebrows. He wasn't angry, but asked Hui Yan curiously. Hui Yan's face showed some hesitation, then he said, along the way, I could see that although you have the same power as the fire god, you don't have any reverence for the fire god. Not only that, you have no reverence for our tribe, for all the rules, customs, and gods of the southern wilderness. This tall and burly barbarian stood on the burning river of lava. From afar, it seemed as if his entire body was burning. He stared at Lu Chen, a complicated expression on his face, and his voice became abnormally low. I now feel that everything you do in the future will be out of line with the people of the wasteland. It will be unexpected, and there will be unpredictable consequences. I also don't know what you will do when you become the priest of our Black Fire tribe, and lead us to a true revival. Will it be good or bad for our tribe? So, you regret it? Lu Chen asked lightly. Then, on the black rock that suddenly burst into flames in the lava, the two men suddenly became silent. They faced each other, looking straight at each other, and there seemed to be sparks flying in their eyes. After an unknown amount of time, when the stiff and cold atmosphere seemed to reach an unbearable point, Hui Yan suddenly turned around and walked forward. At the same time, he said in a low voice, "Follow me, the altar is right in front of us." Looking at the tall figure of the barbarian, Lu Chen was silent for a moment, but he still followed. For the rest of the time, the two of them did not speak. They walked one after another, leaping over several extremely dangerous lava fractures. It was equivalent to making a big circle around the surroundings, and then gradually moving inwards, approaching the huge black rock with the fire god's altar one ring at a time. Halfway through, Lu Chen suddenly felt that this strange and complicated path was actually somewhat like a circle of inward converging whirlpools, just like the huge whirlpool that appeared in the magma river under the Vulcan altar. Was it a coincidence? Lu Chen glanced at the lava whirlpool that was getting closer and closer. His expression was calm, without any change, but a trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. The two of them walked in this manner for almost 3 rounds, before finally finishing this inexplicably long stone path. Very quickly, at the last place close to the Vulcan altar, an abnormally wide fracture appeared in front of the two of them. It was almost twice the width of the other places. The surging, roaring, and scorching lava flowed under the rock, making one's hair stand on end. Although the scene in front of them looked very dangerous, to Hui Yan and Lu Chen, it was not too difficult. Hui Yan could be considered as the strongest among the ordinary barbarian warriors. His strength was ferocious, and his agility was valiant. With a leap with all his might, he jumped over the fracture. As for Lu Chen, with the support of the black flames, it was not a problem for him to pass through this obstacle. After seeing Lu Chen's body lit up with the light of the black flames, and after jumping over the fracture, Hui Yan's tensed face finally softened a little. He nodded to Lu Chen, then turned around and walked towards the location of the 5 black stone pillars. "Hey!" At this moment, Lu Chen suddenly opened his mouth to call out. Hui Yan's body paused for a moment, then he turned to look at him and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen looked straight into his eyes, his expression calm, and said, "Before we go to the altar, I feel that there are some things that I should say to you." Hui Yan was silent for a moment, then nodded and walked to Lu Chen's side, saying, "Speak. If we don't talk about the fire god that you all worship, from the beginning, it was you who insisted that I enter the Black Fire tribe to help you, and used the secret of returning to the north to threaten me. From the beginning to the end, I did not take the initiative to get involved in your tribe's matters, is that right?" "But that is indeed the fire god," Lu Chen interrupted Hui Yan's words, and said, "I said, if we don't talk about the fire god's decree for now, is that right?" Hui Yan slightly lowered his head, and after a moment, he nodded and said, "Yes." Lu Chen said, "At the same time, you also saw that I am a human, different from you. But after weighing the pros and cons, even if you had to face many objections and suspicions, you still chose to believe in me, and wanted me to help you, is that right?" Hui Yan took a deep breath, and his face became somewhat solemn. After a while, he said, "Yes." Lu Chen lightly said, "Then you should also understand that as a human, I have no interest in your tribe or anything in the southern wilderness. I am here today only to find out from you a way to return to the north. And to do this, I can only obtain it by helping your tribe to become strong again. So I can only help you, you don't have to doubt me on this. But other than that, my actions in the future will definitely not be exactly what you expect. If it is really for the prosperity of the Black Fire tribe, you have to give me a promise right now. Can you completely trust me? Otherwise, what if you suddenly turn hostile and stab me in the back when I am halfway through my task? Then wouldn't I be wronged? Hui Yen became silent, and after a while, he said in a low voice, all the barbarians in the wilderness believe in the gods, and worship the ancestors of the tribe. Only you are not. Lu Qin shrugged his shoulders and said, you are right. Hui Yen suddenly became a little agitated, and his face became a little red. He took a step forward and said, I am not asking you to do anything excessive, it is just, at this point, he was momentarily speechless, as if he did not know how to continue. Lu Qin picked up where he left off and said, don't do anything out of line. Don't do things that you cannot accept, or other things that you barbarians cannot stand. Hui Yen clenched his teeth and said in a deep voice, the rules of the wilderness must be followed by every barbarian. But I am not a barbarian. The two people looked at each other, their eyes bright and sharp like blades, and there seemed to be sparks flying in the snow-white light. However, since ancient times, the truth that silence could not solve all problems was the first to come true. After a while, Hui Yen said, then what do you want to do? I can't really let you lead the Black Fire tribe to an irreversible situation. Lu Qin said, I also don't know what I want to do, but you have to understand that I don't know what the Black Fire tribe needs to do to rise again, and what it needs to face. But... He fixed his eyes on Hui Yen, and suddenly laughed. He then said calmly, actually, I have a question that I want to ask you. What? You're the most powerful barbarian I've ever seen since I came to the southern wilderness. Your insight and decisiveness are outstanding. But from your perspective, if everything goes according to the rules you've mentioned, and you don't do anything out of line, even if your tribe adds a normal priest, what are the chances of the Black Fire tribe truly reviving and returning to its former glory? Hui Yan's body suddenly trembled, as if he had been shocked by an electric shock. Then he fell into silence again. After a long time, his voice seemed to be unusually stiff, but he still gritted his teeth and said bit by bit, impossible, it's too difficult. It's fine if the other tribes don't have priests, but the tribes with priests are already very powerful, almost no weaker than our Black Fire. Even if you're a little more powerful than ordinary priests because of the gift from the fire god, there are still the most powerful tribes in the wilderness further away, and there are also the few shamans. When the word shaman came out of Hui Yan's mouth, Lu Qin saw fear and reverence in his eyes. Perhaps this was the natural belief of all barbarians in the wilderness. Then, Lu Qin laughed. He walked over and gently patted the tall and burly barbarian's shoulder. He said in a gentle tone, since it's like this, why don't you let me try? Although it's still very difficult, what if there's a little hope of success? You see, after all, our wishes are the same. You want the tribe to be strong, and I want to return to the north. Even if there are some unusual places along the way, it's not important, right? What do you think? Lu Qin said to Hui Yan with a smile. Hui Yan was silent for a long time, a variety of complicated expressions flashed across his face. But in the end, he finally nodded slowly and heavily. You are right, he said in a low voice.